The reading of the card persuaded me that he were dead, and I was disturbed to find myself a check. Had he not been dead, I would have gone into the little dark room behind the shop to find him sitting in his armchair by the fire, nearly smothered in his greatcoat. Perhaps my aunt would have given me a package of high toast for him, and this present would have roused him from his stupefied doze. It were always I who emptied the packet into his black snuff box, for his hand trembled too much to allow him to do this without spilling half the snuff about the floor. Even as he raised his large trembling hands to his nose, little clouds of smoke dribbled through his fingers over the front of his coat. It may have been these constant showers of snuff which gave his ancient priestly garments their green faded look, for the red handkerchief, blackened as it always was, with the snuff stains of a week, with which he tried to brush away the fallen grains, was quite inefficacious. I wished to go in and look at him, but I had not the courage to knock. I walked away slowly along the sunny side of the street, reading all the theatrical advertisements in the shop windows as I went. I found it strange that neither I nor the day seemed in a morning mood, and I felt even annoyed at discovering in myself a sensation of freedom, as if I had been freed from something by his death. I wondered at this, for, as my uncle had said the night before, he had taught me a great deal. He had studied in the Irish College in Rome, and he had taught me to pronounce Latin properly. He had told me stories about the catacombs and about Napoleon Bonaparte, and he explained to me the meaning of the different ceremonies of the Mass and of the different vestments worn by the priest. Sometimes he had amused himself by putting difficult questions to me, asking me what one should do in certain circumstances, or whether such and such sins were mortal or venial, or only imperfections. His questions showed me how complex and mysterious were certain institutions of the Church, which I always regarded as the simplest acts. The duties of the priest towards the Eucharist and towards the secrecy of the confessional seemed so grave to me, I wondered how anybody had ever found himself the courage to undertake them. I was not surprised when he told me that the fathers of the Church had written books as thick as the post office directory, as closely printed as the law notices in the newspaper, elucidating all these intricate questions. Often when I thought of this, I could make no answer, or only a very foolish and open one, upon which he used to smile and nod his head twice or thrice. Sometimes he used to put me through the responses of the Mass, which he had made me learn by heart, and as I pattered, he used to smile pensively and nod his head, now and then pushing huge pinches of snuff up each nostril alternately. When he smiled, he used to uncover his big, discoloured teeth, and his tongue lie upon his lower lip, an habit which had made me feel very uneasy in the beginning, for our acquaintance, before I knew him well. As I walked along in the sun, I remembered the old cotter's words, and tried to remember what had happened afterward in the dream. I remember that I had noticed long velvet curtains and a swinging lamp of antique fashion. Oh, I'll end you. You come here again selling me streambill, and I will destroy you. I wish rat and ruin upon your house. I wish rot and damnation. May all the gods that have ever walked this world end you. You come here and you do it twice, scum. Burn. Let you know fire. This is my curse on me. I remember that I had noticed the long velvet curtains and a swinging lamp of antique fashion. I felt that I had been very far away, in some land where the customs were strange. In Persia, I thought, but I could not remember the end of the dream. In the evening, my aunt took me with her to visit the house a morning. It were after sunset, but the window panes of the house that looked to the west reflected the tawny gold of a great bank of clouds. Nanny received us in the hall, and as it would have been unseemly to have shouted at her, my aunt shook hands with her for all. The old woman pointed upwards interrogatively, and on my aunt's nodding proceeded to toil up the narrow staircase before us, her bowed head being scarcely above the level of the banister rail. At the first landing she stopped and beckoned us forward encouragingly towards the open door of the dead room. My aunt went in, and the old woman, seeing that I hesitated to enter, began to beckon to me again repeatedly with her hand. I went in on tiptoe. The room, through the lace of the blind, was suffused with dusky golden light, and with which the candles looked like pale, thin flames. He had been coffined. Nanny gave the lead, and we three knelt down at the foot of the bed. I pretended to pray, but I could not gather my thoughts, because the old woman's mutterings distracted me. I noticed how clumsily her skirt were hooked at the back, and how the heels of her cloth boots were trodden down all to one side. A fancy came to me that the old priest was smiling as he lay there in his coffin. But no. When we rose and went up the head of this bed, I saw that he were not smiling. There he lay, solemn and copious, vested as for the altar, his large hands loosely retaining the chalice. His face was very truculent, grey and massive, black cavernous nostrils, encircled by a scanty white fur. There was a heavy odour in the room, flowers. We blessed ourselves and came away. In the little room downstairs we found Eliza seated in his armchair in state. I groped my way towards my usual chair in the corner, while Nanny went to the sideboard and brought out a decanter of sherry and some wine glasses. She set these on the table and invited us to take a little glass of wine. Then, at her sister's bidding, she poured out the sherry into the glasses and passed them to us. She pressed me to take some cream crackers also, but I declined because I thought it would make too much noise eating them. She seemed to be somewhat disappointed at my refusal, and went over quietly to the sofa where she sat down behind her sister. No one spoke. They all gazed at the empty fireplace. My aunt waited until Eliza sighed and then said, "Ah well, he's gone to a better world." Eliza sighed again and bowed her head in assent. My aunt fingered the stem of a wine glass before sipping a little. "Did he peacefully?" she asked. "Oh, quite peacefully, ma'am," said Eliza. "You couldn't tell when the breath went out of him. He had a beautiful death, God be praised. And everything. Father O'Rourke were in with him on a Tuesday and anointed him and prepared him and all." "He knew them?" "He was quite resigned." "He looks quite resigned," said my aunt. "That's what the woman we had in the washroom said. She said he just looked as if he were asleep. He looked that peaceful and resigned. No one would think he'd make such a beautiful corpse." "Yes, indeed," said my aunt. She sipped a little more from her glass and said, "Well, Miss Flynn, at any rate, it must be a great comfort for you to know that you did all you could for him. You're both very kind to him, I must say." Eliza smoothed her dress over her knee. "Ah, poor James," she said. "God knows we've done all we could. As poor as we are, we wouldn't want to see him want anything while he was in it." Nanny had leaned her head against the sofa pillow and seemed about to fall asleep. "There's poor Nanny," said Eliza, looking at her. "She's wore out. All the work we had, she and me, getting the woman to wash him, and then laying him out, and then the coffin, and the arranging about the mass in the chapel. Only for Father O'Rourke, I don't know what we'd have done for him, or done at all. It was him who wrote us all them flowers and them 2 candlesticks out of the chapel, and wrote out the notice for the Freeman's General and took charge of all the papers for the ceremony and poor James' insurance. Wasn't that good of him," said my aunt. Eliza closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. "Ah, there's no friends like the old friends," she said. "When all is said and done, no friends that a body can trust." "Indeed, that's true," said my aunt. "I'm sure now that he's gone to his eternal reward, he won't forget you and all your kindness to him." "Ah, poor James," said Eliza. "He were no great trouble to us. You wouldn't hear him in the house any more than now. Still, I know he's gone and all to that." "That's when it's all over that you miss him," said my aunt. "I know that," said Eliza. "I won't be bringing him in his cup of beef tea any more, nor you, ma'am, send him in his snuff. Ah, poor James." She stopped, as if she were communing with the past, and then said shrewdly, "Mind you, I noticed there was something queer coming over him latterly. Whenever I'd bring in a soup to him, there I'd find him with his breviary fallen to the floor, lying back in the chair and his mouth open." She laid a finger against her nose and frowned, and she continued, "But still and all he kept on saying that before the summer were over he'd go out for a drive one fine day, just to see the old house again where we were all born down an Irish town, and take me and Nanny with him. If we could only get one of them newfangled carriages that make no noise that Father O'Rourke told him about. Then with the rheumatic wheels, for the day cheap, he said, Johnny rushes over the way there, and drive out the 3 of us together of a Sunday evening. He had his mind set on that. Poor James." "The Lord have mercy on his soul," said my aunt. Eliza took out her handkerchief and wiped her eyes with it. Then she put it back again in her pocket, and gazed at the empty grate for some time without speaking. "You were too scrupulous always," she said. "The duties of the priesthood were too much for him. And then his life was, you might say, crossed." "Yes," said my aunt. "He was a disappointed man, you could see that." A silence took possession of the little room, and under the cover of it I approached the table and tasted my sherry, then returned quietly to my chair in the corner. Eliza seemed to have fallen into a deep reverie. We waited respectfully for her to break the silence, and after a long pause she said slowly, "It was that chalice he broke. That was the beginning of it. Of course they said we're all right, that it contained nothing, but still, they said it was the boy's fault. Poor James was so nervous, God be merciful to him." "Was that it?" said my aunt. "I heard something." Eliza nodded. "That affected his mind," she said. "After that he began to mope by himself, talking to no one and wandering about by himself. So one night he was wanted to go on a call and they couldn't find him anywhere. Looked high and up and low, down, and still they couldn't see a sight of him anywhere. So then the clerk suggested to try the chapel. And they got the keys and opened the chapel, and the clerk and Father O'Rourke and another priest that were there brought in a light for the look for him. And what do you think? But there he was, sitting up by himself in the dark in his confession box, wide awake and laughing softly to himself. She stopped suddenly as if to listen. I too listened. There were no sound in the house, and I know the old priest were lying still in his coffin as we had seen him, solemn and truculent in death, an idle chalice on his breast. Eliza resumed, wide awake and laughing like to himself. So then, of course, when they saw that, they made them think that there was something gone wrong with him. And that's the end of that chapter. That's a bit odd. I'm not exactly sure what I think of that one. I mean, there's not... I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot to it. But at the same time, there's certainly something there. I don't know what to say, really. I don't know what to think. I'll have a quick drink of water while I puzzle on that. I mean, let's go through it step by step, I suppose, what there is in there. We have, the death of the old man, the reflection on it, and then the happening, and the intimation that the young man, who is our narrator in this story, his relationship with that priest is not a good thing for him, despite the education it affords him. We have this dream of a confession being made, and then talk of the ritual of the church, of confession and, mortal venial sins, and then, I forget the third one, sort of missteps, minor things. And then we have, I suppose, the titular sisters, Eliza and Nanny, who see to his corpse and who are met with by the narrator and his aunt in the sort of soft mourning period. I'm not entirely sure about that. It seems very, I don't know, simple, but not in like a negative light, in a very realistic sort of light. There's not a lot to it, in the sense that there's not a lot of excess or drama or excitement. It just feels like a real thing that's happened. A real small tragedy. And a young man who doesn't know exactly how to feel about it. Conflicted by the death. I suppose torn between the very real belief in the sort of rituals of the church and the idea of a better life, and then the loss of a friend who, despite being a priestess who believed strongly in such a thing, is gone. And then also a sort of sad disdain for it. Like, I mean, the description of the priest aren't exactly pleasant. Trembling hands and the snuff. Like, you can see why a person might be uncomfortable spending time in his presence, even if he is an actual benefit to your life. I mean, it says we were unnerved by some of his habits early on. It's a conflicted story. There's no real clear emotional sort of through line to it. There's a lot to it too. There's a lot of depth to it. I don't know what to take from it. Still, I'll never learn if I keep just going on, will I? We'll have to look through more of this book and see if we can't get more of a sense of these. You're interested, no? Right. An encounter. It was Joe Dillon who introduced the Wild West to us. He had a little library made up of old numbers of the Union Jack, Pluck, and the Halfpenny Marvel. Every evening after school we met in his back garden and arranged Indian battles. He and his fat young brother Leo the Idler held the loft of the stable, or we tried to carry it by storm. We fought pitched battles on the grass. But however well we fought, we never won siege or battle, and all our bouts ended with Joe Dillon's war dance of victory. His parents went to 8 o'clock mass every morning in Gardner Street, and the peaceful odour and Miss Dillon were prevalent in the hall of the house. He played too fiercely for us, who were younger and more timid. He looked like some kind of an Indian when he capered around the garden, an old tea cosy on his head, beating a tin with his fist and yelling, "Ya, ya ka, ya ka, ya ka." Everyone were incredulous when it was reported that he had a vocation for the priesthood. Nevertheless, it was true. A spirit of unruliness diffused itself among us, and under its influence differences of culture and constitution were waived. We banded ourselves together, some boldly, some in jest, and some almost in fear. And a number of these latter, the reluctant Indians who were afraid to seem studious or lacking in robustness, I were one. The adventures related in the literature of the Wild West were remote from our nature, but at least they opened doors of escape. I like better some American detective stories, which were traversed from time to time by unkempt, fierce and beautiful girls. Though there were nothing wrong in these stories, and though their intention was sometimes literary, they were circulated secretly at school. One day when Father Butler were hearing the 4 pages of Roman history, clumsy Leo Dillon was discovered with a copy of the Halfpenny Marvel. "This page or this page? This page? Now, Dillon, up. Hardly had the day. Go on, what day? Hardly had the day dawned. Have you studied it? What have you there in your pocket?" Everyone's heart palpitated as Leo Dillon handed up the paper and everyone assumed an innocent face. Father Butler turned over the pages, frowning. "What is this rubbish?" he said. "The Apache chief? Is this what you read instead of studying your Roman history? Let me not find any more of this wretched stuff in this college. The man who wrote it, I suppose, was some wretched scribbler that writes these things for a drink. I'm surprised at boys like you, educated, reading such stuff. I could understand it if you were national school boys. Now, Dillon, I advise you strongly, get out your work or..." This rebuke during the sober hours at school paled much of the glory of the Wild West for me, and the confused, puffy face of Leo Dillon awakened one of my consciences. But when the restraining influence of the school was at distance, I began to hunger again for wild sensations, the escape which those chronicles of disorder alone seemed to offer me. The mimic warfare of the evening became, at last, as wearisome to me as the routine of school in the morning became. I wanted real adventures to happen to myself. But real adventures, I reflected, do not happen to people who remain at home. They must be sought abroad. The summer holidays were near at hand when I made up my mind to break out the weariness of school life for one day at least. With Leo Dillon and a boy named Mahoney, I planned a day's mitching. Each of us saved up 6pence. We were to meet at 10 in the morning on the canal bridge. Mahoney's big sister was to write an excuse for him, and Leo Dillon was to tell his brother to say he was sick. We arranged to go along the wharf road until we came to the ships, then across in the ferry boat and walk out to see the pigeon house. Leo Dillon were afraid we might meet Father Butler or someone out of the college, but Mahoney asked very sensibly what would Father Butler be doing out at the pigeon house. We were reassured, and I brought the first stage block to an end by collecting 6pence from the other two, at the same time showing them my own 6pence. When we were making the last arrangements on the eve, we were all vaguely excited. We shook hands, laughing, and Mahoney said, "Till tomorrow, mates." That night I slept badly. In the morning I was the first comer at the bridge, as I lived nearest. I hid my boots in the long grass and the asphalt at the end of the garden, where nobody ever came, and hurried along the canal banks. It was a mild sunny morning in the first weeks of June. As I sat up on the coping of the bridge, admiring my frail canvas shoes, which I had diligently park-laid overnight, and watching the docile horses pulling a tramload of business people up the hill, all the branches of the tall trees which lined the mall were gay with little light green leaves, and the sunlight slanted through them onto the water. The granite stone of the bridge were beginning to be warm, and I began to pat it with my hands in time to an air in my head. I was very happy. When I had been sitting there for 5 or 10 minutes, I saw Mahoney's grey suit approaching. He came up the hill, smiling, and clambered up beside me on the bridge. While we were waiting, he brought out the catapult, which bulged from his inner pocket, and explained some improvements which he had made in it. I asked him why he had bought it, and he told me he had brought it to have some gas with the birds. He only used slang freely, and spoke of Father Butler as Bunsen burner. We waited on for a quarter of an hour more, but still there were no sign of Leo Dillon. Mahoney at last jumped down and said, "Come along, I knew Fat'd funk it." "And his sixpence?" I said. "That's forfeit," said Mahoney. "And so much the better for us. A bob and a tanner instead of a bob." We walked along the North Strand Road till we came to the Vitriol Works, and then turned to the right along the Wharf Road. Mahoney began to play the engine as soon as we were out of public sight. He chased a crowd of ragged girls, brandishing his unloaded catapult, and when two ragged boys began out of chivalry to fling stones at us, he proposed that we should charge them. I objected to that. The boys were too small, so we walked on, the ragged troop screaming after us, "Swaddlers, swaddlers," thinking that we were Protestants because Mahoney, who was dark complexion, wore the silver badge of a cricket club in his cap. When we came to the smoothing iron, we arranged a siege, but it were a failure because you must have at least 3. We revenged ourselves on Lee and Dillon by saying what a funk he was and guessing how many he would get at 3 o'clock from Mr. Ryan. We came then near the river. We spent a long time walking about the noisy streets flanked by ice-stone walls, watching the working of cranes and engines, and often being shouted at for our immobility by the drivers of groaning carts. It was noon when we reached the quays, and, as all the labourers seemed to be eating their lunches, we bought 2 big currant buns and sat down to eat them on some metal piping beside the river. We pleased ourselves with the spectacle of Dublin's commerce. The barges signalled from afar away by their chunks of woolly smoke, the brown fishing fleet beyond Ringsend, the big white sailing vessel which was being discharged at the opposite quay, or quay I should say. I only said it would be right skit to run away to sea on one of those big ships, and even I, looking at the eye masts or imagined geography which had been scantily dosed to me at school, gradually taking substance under my eyes. School and home seemed to recede from us, and their influence upon us seemed to wane. We crossed the Liffey in the ferry boat, paying our toll to be transported in the company of 2 labourers and a little Jew with a bag. We were serious to the point of solemnity, but once during the short voyage our eyes met and we laughed. When we landed, we watched the discharging of the graceful 3-master which we had observed from the other quay. Some bystanders said that she were a Norwegian vessel. I went to the stern and tried to decipher the legend upon it, but failing to do so, I came back and examined the foreign sailors to see if had any of them green eyes, for I had some confused notion. The sailors' eyes were blue and grey, and even black. The only sailor whose eyes could have been called green was a tall man, who amused the crowd on the quay by calling out cheerfully every time the planks fell, "All right, all right." When we were tired of this sight, we wandered slowly into the Ringston. The day had grown sultry, and in the windows of the grocers' shops, musty biscuits lay bleaching. We bought some biscuits and chocolate, which we ate sedulously. Don't know that word. We ate sedulously as we wandered through the squalid streets where the families of the fishermen live. We could find no dairy, and so we went to a huckster's shop and bought a bottle of raspberry lemonade each. Refreshed by this, we only chased the cat down a lane, and the cat escaped into a wide field. We both felt rather tired, and when we reached the field, we made at once for a sloping bank over the ridge which we could see the Dodder. It was too late and we were too tired to carry out our project of visiting the pigeon house. We had to be home before 4 o'clock lest our adventure should be discovered. Mahoney looked regretfully at his catapult, and I had to suggest going home by train before he regained any cheerfulness. Sun went in behind some clouds, and left us to our jaded thoughts and the crumbs of our provisions. There were nobody but ourselves in the field. When we had lain on the bank for some time without speaking, I saw a man approaching from the far end of the field. Watched him lazily as I chewed one of them green stems on which girls tell fortunes. They came along by the bank slowly. He walked with one hand upon his hip, and the other hand he held a stick on which he tapped the turf lightly. He was shabbily dressed in a suit of greenish black, and wore what we used to call a jerry hat, with an eye crown. He seemed to be fairly old, for his moustache were ash and grey. When he passed our feet, he glanced up at us quickly, and then continued his way. We followed him with our eyes, and saw that when he had gone on for perhaps 50 paces, he turned about and began to retrace his steps. He walked towards us very slowly, always tapping the ground with his stick, so slowly that I thought he were looking for something in the grass. He stopped when he came level with us, and bade us good day. We answered him, and he sat down beside us on the slope, slowly and with great care. We began to talk of the weather, saying that it would be very hot summer, and adding that the seasons had changed greatly since he were a boy, a long time ago. He said the happiest time of one's life was undoubtedly one's schoolboy days, and he would give anything to be young again. While he expressed these sentiments, which bored us a little, we kept silent. Then he began to talk of school and the books. He asked us whether we had read the poetry of Thomas More, or the works of Sir Walter Scott and Lord Lytton. I pretended that I had read every book he mentioned, so that in the end he said, "Ah, I can see you were a bookworm like myself." Now, he added, pointing to Mahoney, who was regarding us with open eyes. He is different. He goes in for games. He said he had all Sir Walter Scott's works and all Lord Lytton's works at home and never tired of reading them. Of course, he said there were some of Lord Lytton's works which boys couldn't read. I only asked why couldn't boys read them, a question which agitated and pained me, as I was afraid the man would think I was as stupid as Mahoney. The man, however, only smiled. I saw that he had great gaps in his mouth between his yellow teeth. They asked which of us had the most sweethearts. Mahoney mentioned lightly that he had 3 totties. The man asked how many I'd had. I answered that I had none. He did not believe me and said he was sure I must have 1. I was silent. "Tell us," said Mahoney partly to the man, "how many have you yourself?" The man smiled as before and said that when he were our age he had lots of sweethearts. "Every boy," he said, "has a little sweetheart." His attitude on this point struck me strangely liberal in a man of his age. In my heart I thought that what he said about boys and sweethearts was reasonable, but I disliked the words in his mouth, and I wondered why he shivered once or twice as if he feared something, or felt a sudden chill. As he proceeded, I noticed that his accent was good. He began to speak to us about girls, saying what nice soft hair they had, and how soft their hands were. And all girls were not so good as they seemed to be, if one only knew. There was nothing he liked, he said, so much as looking at a nice young girl, at a nice white hand, and a beautiful soft hair. He gave me the impression that he was repeating something which he had learned by heart, or that, magnetised by some word of his own speech, his mind was slowly circling round and round in the same orbit. At times he spoke as if he were simply alluding to some fact that everybody knew, and at times he lowered his voice and spoke mysteriously, as if he were telling us something secret which he did not wish others to overhear. He repeated his phrases over and over again, varying them and surrounding them with his monotonous voice. I continued to gaze towards the foot of the slope, listening to him. After a long while his monologue paused. He stood up slowly, saying that he had to leave us for a minute or so. A few minutes, and without changing the direction of my gaze, I saw him walking slowly away from us, towards the near end of the field. We remained silent when he had gone. After a silence of a few minutes, I heard Mahoney exclaim, "I say, look what he's doing." As I neither answered nor raised my eyes, Mahoney exclaimed again, "I say, he's a queer old josser." "In case he asks us for our names," I said, "let you be Murphy and I'll be Smith." We said nothing further to each other. I was still considering whether I would go away or not, when the man came back and sat down beside us again. Hardly had he sat down when Mahoney, catching sight of the cat which had escaped him, sprang up and pursued her across the field. The man and I watched the chase. The cat escaped once more, and Mahoney began to throw stones at the wall she had escaladed. Desisted from this, he began to wander about the far end of the field aimlessly. After an interval, the man spoke to me. He said that my friend was a very rough boy, and he asked did he get whipped often at school. I was going to reply indignantly that we were not national school boys to be whipped, as he called it, but I remained silent. He began to speak on the subject of chastising boys. His mind, as if magnetised again by his speech, seemed to circle slowly round and round its new centre. He said that when boys were that kind, they ought to be whipped and well whipped. When a boy were rough and unruly, there were nothing would do him any good but a good sound whipping. A slap on the hand or on a box in the ear were no good. What he wanted was to get a nice warm whipping. I was surprised at this sentiment, and involuntarily glanced up at his face. As I did so, I met the gaze of a pair of bottle green eyes peering at me from under a twitching forehead. I turned my eyes away again. The man continued his monologue. He seemed to have forgotten his recent liberalism. He said that if he ever found a boy talking to a girl or having a girl for a sweetheart, he would whip him, and that would teach him not to be talking to girls. And if a boy had a girl for a sweetheart and told lies about it, then he would give him such a whipping as no boy ever got in this world. He said there were nothing in this world he would like so well as that. He described to me how he would whip such a boy as if he were unfolding some elaborate mystery. He would love that, he said, better than anything in this world. And his voice, as he led me monotonously through the mystery, grew almost affectionate, and seemed to plead with me that I should understand him. I waited till his monologue paused again, then I stood up abruptly. Lest I should betray my agitation, I delayed a few moments, pretending to fix my shoe properly, and then, saying that I was obliged to go, I bade him good day. I went up the slope calmly, but my heart was beating quickly with fear that he would seize me by the ankles. When I reached the top of the slope, I turned round and, without looking at him, called loudly across the field, Murphy. My voice had an accent of forced bravery in it, and I was ashamed of my paltry stratagem. I had to call the name again before Mahoney saw me, and although he didn't answer, and my heart beat as he came running across the field to me. He ran as if to bring me aid, and I was penitent, for in my heart I had always despised him a little. And that's the end of that chapter. Or should I say that's the end of an encounter? That was an old one. Again, it's fairly rambling. There are sort of aspects you can get from it, sort of boyhood, and I don't know if I'd say childishness, maybe growing up, on the cusp of things. And the encounter spoken of is certainly quite unsettling. He strikes me as quite an unwholesome man. Though whether perhaps he's only speaking as someone who sort of noticed these two boys dossing off the school and is trying to put a little bit of fear into them, or if he is genuinely a character of some malevolence is hard to say. I'm going to take a drink again before I continue, just give myself time a bit to think about it. There's something very alive about these stories. The little details, the little anecdotes, looking to see if the sailors have green eyes, which I suppose is then sort of called back to when you see the green eyes of the, what do we call them, the stranger? Stranger, I suppose, yeah, that'll work. It comes odd, the whole thing. There's a sort of synchronicity to it, sort of a putting together of things. There's no real one story, one narrative that runs through it. I mean, you start the story, the real story, about halfway through. All the stuff about Indians and the Wild West, detective novels and, what is it, Roman history lessons. All those sort of build a little bit of background, but the actual narrative barely calls them at all. I mean, the boy that they're talking about most of in it, his name I now forget, he doesn't show up at all, leaves at sixpence. And you're left with Mahoney, who you don't actually see very much of. Well, that last line, I had always despised him a little, that's a very telling line. Seeing someone in a whole different light when you see the side of them that runs to your aid in a bad situation. Yes, there is something to that. I'm not sure about these. They're not as clear cut as some of the stuff I've read, especially not the London. Even the Time Machine, there was a lot to it, but there was a clear sort of message. But these, there's just happenings. I'm not sure what to think about them. I almost feel like I don't understand them very well. And maybe this is a book I should come back to later on. But I suppose that's something I can do whether I read it or not. I may as well push through and see if I get more of it as we go. And if I don't, I can always come back to it some years from now when I've read more of these. Well, some years from now. Ain't that an unpleasant thought? Years from now, trapped down here. Alone. Alone, there's something to that actually. For all the sort of unclear narrative, what both these stories have in common actually is relationship and community, a sense of people and belonging. The sisters and the aunt and the old priest in the first one, and even the, what was his name? The fella, Cotter, that's it, old Cotter. All of them, I don't know, there's something between them. Same as there is with Mahoney and his, what you call it, and the boy who doesn't show up and all them. In a lot of ways, that these stories are about the people in them. I suppose that's maybe a bit thin to draw a theme of, especially only between two of them. I'm probably talking more than I should, but I'm trying to get my head around it. That's taking time. Still, no sense wasting, I'm still feeling pretty good. So let's get on. Araby. North Richmond Street, being Blarn, was a quiet street, except at the hour when the Christian Brothers school set the boys free. An uninhabited house of 2 stories stood at the blind end, detached from its neighbours in a square ground. The other houses of the street, conscious of decent lives within them, gazed at one another with brown, imperturbable faces. The former tenant of our house, a priest, had died in the back drawing room. Air, musty from having been long enclosed, hung in all the rooms, and the waste room behind the kitchen were lit with old useless papers. Among these I found a few paper-covered books, the pages of which were cold and damp. The Abbot by Walter Scott, The Devout Communicant, and the Memoirs of Vidocq. It's Vidocq. Name, I'm not sure. I liked the last best because its leaves were yellow. The wild garden behind the house contained a central apple tree, and a few straggling bushes, under one of which I found the late tenant's rusty bicycle pump. He had been a very charitable priest. In his will he left all his money to institutions, and the furniture of his house to his sister. And the short days of winter dusk fell before we had well eaten our dinners. When we met in the street, the houses had grown sombre. The space of sky above us was the colour of ever-changing violet, and towards it the lamps of the street lifted their feeble lanterns. The cold air stung us, and we played till our bodies glowed. Our shouts echoed in the silent street. The career of our play brought us through the dark, muddy lanes behind the houses. We ran the gauntlet of rough tribes from the cottages to the back doors of the dark, dripping gardens, where odours arose from the asphalts, to the dark, odorous stables, where coachmen smoothed and combed the horse, or shook music from the buckled harness. We returned the street light from the kitchen window. When we returned to the street, light from the kitchen windows had filled the area. If my uncle was seen turning the corner, we hid in the shadow until we had seen him safely out. Or if Mangan's sister came out on the doorstep to call her brother in to his tea, we watched her from our shadow peer up and down the street. We waited to see whether she would remain or go in, and if she remained, we left our shadow and walked up. Mangan stepped resignedly. She was waiting for us, a figure defined by the light from the half-open door. Her brother always teased her before he obeyed, and I stood by the railings looking at her. Her dress swung as she moved, her body, and the soft rope of her hair tossed from side to side. Every morning I lay on the floor in the front parlour, watching her door. The blind were pulled down within an inch of the sash, so that I could not be seen. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leaped. I ran to the hall, seized my books, and followed her. I kept the brown figure always in my eye, and when we came near the point at which our ways diverged, I quickened my pace and passed her. This happened morning after morning. I had never spoken to her, except for a few casual words, and yet her name was like a summons to all my foolish blood. Her image accompanied me even in places that the most hostile to romance. On Saturday evenings, when my aunt went marketing, I had to go to carry some of the parcels. We walked through the flaring streets, jostled by drunken men and bargaining women, amid the curse of labourers, the shrill litanies of shop boys who stood on guard by the barrels of pigs' cheeks, and the nasal chanting of the street singers, who sang a "Come All You" about O'Donovan Rosa, or a ballad about the troubles in our native land. These noises converged in a single sensation of life for me. I imagined that I bore my chalice safely through a throng of foes. My name sprang to my lips at moments in strange prayers, praises which I myself did not understand. My eyes were often full of tears, I could not tell why. At times a flood from my heart seemed to pour itself out into my bosom. I thought little of the future. I did not know whether I would ever speak to her or not. If I spoke to her, how I could tell her in my confused adoration. But my body was like a harp, and her words and gestures were like fingers running up on the wires. One evening I went into the back drawing room in which the priest had died. It was a dark and rainy evening, and there were no sound in the house. Through one of the broken panes I heard the rain impinge upon the earth, the fine incessant needles of water playing in the sodden beds. Some distant lamp or lighted window gleamed below me. I was thankful that I could see so little. All my senses seemed to desire to veil themselves, and, feeling that I was about to slip from them, I pressed the palms of my hands together until they trembled, murmuring, oh love, many times. At last she spoke to me. When she addressed the first words to me, I was so confused that I did not know what to answer. She asked me was I going to Araby. I forgot whether I answered yes or no. It would be a splendid bazaar, she said. She would love to go. And why can't you? I asked. While she spoke, she turned a silver bracelet round and round her wrist. She could not go, she said, because there would be a retreat that week in her convent. Her brother and 2 other boys were fighting for their caps, and I was alone at the railing. She held one of the spikes, bowing her head towards me. The light from the lamp opposite our door caught the white curve of her neck, lit up her hair that rested there, and, falling, lit up the hand upon the railing. It fell over one side of her dress, and caught the white border of her petticoat, just visible as she stood at ease. It's well for you, she said. If I go, I said, I will bring you something. What innumerable follies laid waste my waking and sleeping thoughts after that evening. I wished to annihilate the tedious intervening days. I chafed against the work of the school. At night in my bedroom and by day in the classroom, her image came between me and the page I strove to read. The syllables of the word, Araby, called to me through the silence in which my soul luxuriated, and cast an eastern enchantment over me. I asked for leave to go to the bazaar on Saturday night. My aunt was surprised and hoped it was not some Freemason affair. I answered a few questions in class. I watched my master's face pass from amiability to sternness. He hoped I was not beginning to idle. I could not call my wandering thoughts together. I had hardly any patience with the serious work of life, which now that it stood between me and my desires seemed to me child's play, ugly monotonous child's play. On Saturday morning I reminded my uncle that I wished to go to the bazaar in the evening. He was fussing at the all stand, looking for the hat brush, and answered me curtly. Yes, boy, I know. As he were in the hall, I could not go into the front parlour and lie at the window. I left the house in a bad humour and walked slowly towards the school. The air was pitilessly raw, and already my heart misgave me. When I came home to dinner, my uncle had not yet been home. Still, it were early. I sat staring at the clock for some time, and when its ticking began to irritate me, I left the room. I went up the staircase and gained the upper part of the house. The high, cold, empty, gloomy rooms liberated me, and I went from room to room singing. First, the front window, I saw my companions playing below in the street. Their cries reached me, weakened and indistinct, and leaning my forehead against the cool glass, I looked over at the dark house where she lived. I may have stood there for an hour, seeing nothing but the brown-clad figure cast by my imagination, touched discreetly by the lamplight at the curved neck and the hand upon the railing and at the border below the dress. When I came downstairs again, I found Mr. Mercer sitting at the fire. Miss Mercer sitting at the fire. She was an old garrulous woman, a pawnbroker's widow, who collected used stamps for some pious purpose. I had to endure the gossip of the tea table. The meal was prolonged beyond an hour, and still my uncle did not come. Miss Mercer stood up to go. She was sorry she couldn't wait longer, but we were after 8 o'clock, and she did not like to be out late, as the night air were bad for her. When she had gone, I began to walk up and down the room, clenching my fists. My aunt said, I'm afraid you may put off your bazaar for this night of our Lord. At 9 o'clock I heard my uncle's latchkey in the hall door. I heard him talking to himself and heard the hall stand rocking when it had received the weight of his overcoat. I could interpret these signs. When he was with me through his dinner, I asked him to give me the money to go to the bazaar. He had forgotten. The people are in bed and after their first sleep now, he said. I did not smile. My aunt said to him energetically, can't you give him the money and let him go? You've kept him late enough as it is. My uncle said he was very sorry he had forgotten. He said he believed in the old saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. He asked me where I was going, and when I told him a second time, he asked me did I know the Arab's farewell in his steed. When I left the kitchen, he was about to recite the opening lines of the piece to my aunt. I held a florin tightly in my hand as I strode down Buckingham Street towards the station. The sight of the streets thronged with buyers and glaring with gas recalled to me the purpose of my journey. I took my seat in a third-class carriage of a deserted train. After an intolerable delay, the train moved out of the station slowly. It crept onward among ruinous houses and over the twinkling river. At Westland Row Station, a crowd of people pressed to the carriage doors, and the porters moved them back, saying that it was a special train for the bazaar. I remained alone in the bare carriage. In a few minutes, the train drew up beside an improvised wooden platform. I passed out onto the road and saw by the lighted dial of a clock that it was 10 minutes to 10. In front of me was a large building which displayed the magical name. I could not find any sixpenny entrance, and, fearing that the bazaar would be closed, I passed in quickly through a turnstile, and in a shilling to a weary-looking man. I found myself in a big hall girded at half its height by a gallery. Nearly all the stalls were closed, and the greatest part of the hall was in darkness. I recognised a silence like that which pervades a church after a service. I walked in the centre of the bazaar timidly. A few people were gathered about the stalls, which were still open. Before a curtain over which the words Café Chanton were written in coloured lamps, two men were counting money on a salver. I listened to the fall of the coins. Remembering with difficulty why I had come, I went over to one of the stalls and examined porcelain vases and flowered tea sets. At the door of the stall, a young lady were talking and laughing with two young gentlemen. I remarked their English accents and listened vaguely to their conversation. "Oh, I never said such a thing." "Oh, but you did." "Oh, but I didn't." "Didn't she say that?" "Yes, I heard her." "Oh, there's a fib." Observing me, the young lady came over and asked me did I wish to buy anything. The tone of her voice were not encouraging. She seemed to have spoken me out of a sense of duty. I looked dumbly at the great jars that stood like eastern guards at either side of the dark entrance of the stall and murmured, "No, thank you." The young lady changed the position of one of the vases and went back to the two young men. They began to talk of the same subject. Once or twice the young lady glanced over at me over her shoulder. I lingered before our stall, though I knew my stay were useless. To make my interest in her wares seem more real, then I turned away slowly and walked down the middle of the bazaar. I allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the sixpence in my pocket. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery that the light was out. The upper part of the hall went out completely dark. Gazing out into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and desired and derided by vanity. My eyes burned with anguish and anger. That's the end of that. That is a strange one. These are all strange. I suppose maybe I'm judging them unfairly. But, well, no, I'm not judging them unfairly. I don't dislike them. But they are strange. Having a drink again to think about it. It seems to me that in this one there is... what would you call it? I always want to say affection, but that's not the right word. Enchantment? Enrapturement? It's like, what was it? The Nightborn. By London, you have the story told from this one fellow who... what would the term be? Well, there's a word that I'm trying to recall and I can't think of it. He's, I don't know. I really can't. He's annoying. There's a clear word. I think it begins with an E. I can't think. Enraptured, mate. That's after it. Yeah, enraptured with this girl. And what seems to be pretty clearly a boyish crush. And he spends he spends a great deal of anxiety and stress on the smallest opportunities, first sort of interaction with her. And he builds it up in his mind, and things go a bit wrong, and I don't know, it's odd. And he doesn't go through with it, is the thing. And it's not like he says that he looks at all the stalls and there's nothing he can buy, or even on the one stall he's looking at there's nothing he can get her, or way of a little trinket. But I guess it seems that he built up in his mind this sort of great thing that he was going to do. I mean, she built up in him too, you know? This wonderful bazaar. He's going to go and there's going to be things and he's going to bring back a little trinket. And his uncle's only. And he's only got a little bit of money and he can't find his way, so he loses more of it. And then he gets in there and it's half closed and half shuttered. That's not very impressive. And the exotic people he's expecting are just English, which I think this is an Irish book, and from what I recall of geography, those aren't exactly worlds away from one another. And it just all sort of comes apart in his head. The fantasy fades, and he sees himself as quite stupid. I'm not sure if this house that he's talking about in the start, the house he's living in, is meant to be the same one whether the priest that died in it is the same one we were seeing in the first story. I'm not even sure. All these narrators say I. They're all I narrators. And they all seem to be, I suppose, youngish boys, but I can't tell if they're the same person or not. It's strange to me. I mean, there's a certain sort of similarity of voice between them, but that could just be because they're by the same author. I can't tell. Strange. I do not feel like I understand. But at the same time, I do feel like I'm getting glimpses of understanding. Like there are things that are apparent about this. Right. I'm just going to have a look at the front of this book real quick. So there are 15 stories in there. So far we've gotten through 3. I'm still feeling pretty good. So we could try and do 5 a day and get through this in 3 days. And that would probably be pretty reasonable. Or we could try and do, say, 8 today and 7 tomorrow and get through it in 2. I could quit now and do 5 days of it, but I don't want to do that. I like this book. There's something to it. I don't know, I think it might be the longest we've done. It's at least a comparable length to White Fang, but it's a very different sort of story. Well, even if you can even call it a story. Each of these is sort of a little self-contained thing. I don't know. I almost call this a selection of short stories, but then the short stories we read before all been so different from one another, really. I mean, sure, there's some things that overlap between them, but these, I don't know, I mean, I guess these aren't the same in like the sense of stories. I think they all share a place. I think that's why it's called Dubliners. They all take a place in the city, but I don't know what to call it. There's something that they have in common. I sort of sense to them. I don't know. I think I'm going to push on anyway. I don't think there's anyone here to tell me that they're not enjoying it, so it's just a case of me making my own judgments over the course of the 80 people coming in to sell me streamboo.com. Oh, how I hate them. How I loathe them. I'm enjoying the book, and since there's no one here to tell me otherwise, I'm going to keep on with it. Eveline. She sat at the window, watching the evening invade the avenue. Her head leaned against the window curtains, and in her nostrils was the odour of dusty cretonne. She was tired. Few people passed. The man at the last house passed out on his way home. She heard his footsteps patting along the concrete pavement, and afterward crunching on the cinder path before the new red houses. One time there used to be a field there, which they used to play every evening with other people's children. Then a man from Belfast bought the field and built houses in it. Not like their little brown house, but bright brick houses with shining roofs. The children of the avenue used to play together in that field. The Devines, the Waters, the Duns, little Kerr, the cripple, she and her brothers and sisters. Ernest, however, never played. He was too grown up. Her father used often to hunt them in out of the field with his blackthorn stick. Usually little Kerg used to keep nicks and call out when he saw her father coming. Still, they seemed to have been rather happy then. Her father were not so bad then, and besides, her mother were alive. That were a long time ago. She and her brothers and sisters were all grown up. Her mother were dead. Sissy Dunn were dead too, and the Waters had gone back to England. Everything changes. Now she was going to go away like the others, to leave her home. Home. She looked round the room, reviewing all its familiar objects, which she had dusted once a week. For too many years, wondering where on earth all the dust came from. Perhaps she would never see again those familiar objects from which she had never dreamed of being divided. And yet during all those years she had never found out the name of the priest whose yellowing photograph hung on the wall above the broken harmonium, beside the colour print of the promise made to Blessed Margaret Mary Alcock. He had been a school friend of her father's. Whenever he showed the photograph to a visitor, her father used to pass it with a casual word. He's in Melbourne now. She had consented to go away, to leave her home. That she tried to weigh each side of the question. In her home anyway, she had shelter and food. She had those whom she had known all her life about her. Of course, she had to work hard, both in the house and her business. What would they say of her in the stores when they found out that she had run away with a fella? Say she were a fool, perhaps, and her place would be filled up by advertisement. Miss Gavin would be glad. She had always had an edge on her, especially whenever there were people listening. "Miss Hill, don't you see these ladies are waiting? Look lively, Miss Hill, please." She would not cry many tears at leaving the stores. But in a new home in a distant unknown country it would not be like that. Then she would be married. She, Evelyn. People would treat her with respect then. She would not be treated as a mother had been. Even though she was over 19, she sometimes felt herself in danger of her father's violence. She knew it was that had given her the palpitations. When they were growing up, he had never gone for her, like he used to go for Harry and Ernest, because she were a girl. But latterly he had begun to threaten her, and say what he would do to her only for her dead mother's sake. And now she had nobody to protect her. Ernest were dead, and Harry, who were in the church decorating business, were nearly always down somewhere in the country. Besides, the invariable squabble for money on Saturday night had begun to weary her unspeakably. She always gave her entire wages, 7 shillings, and Harry always sent on what he could, but the trouble was to get any money from her father. He said she used to squander the money, that she had no head, and he wasn't going to give her his hard-earned money to throw about the street, and much more, for he were usually fairly bad of a Saturday night. In the end, he would give her the money and ask her had she any intention of buying Sunday's dinner. Then she had to rush out as quickly as she could and do her marketing, holding the black leather purse tightly in her hand as she elbowed her way through the crowds, and returned home late under a load of provisions. She had hard work to keep the house together, and to see that the 2 young children who had been left to her charge went to school regularly and got their meals regularly. It was hard work, an hard life. Now that she were about to leave it, she did not find it a wholly undesirable life. She were about to explore another life with Frank. Frank was very kind, manly, open-hearted. She was to go away with him by the night boat to be his wife and live with him in Buenos Aires, where he had a home waiting for her. How well she remembered the first time she had seen him. He was lodging in a house on the main road where she used to visit. It seemed a few weeks ago. He was standing at the gate, his peaked cap pushed back on his hair tumbled forward over a face of bronze. Then they had come to know each other. He used to meet her outside the stores every evening and see her home. He took her to see The Bohemian Girl, and she felt elated as she sat in an unaccustomed part of the theatre with him. He was awfully fond of music and sang a little. People knew that they were courting, and when he sang about the lass that loves a sailor, she always felt pleasantly confused. He used to call her Poppins out of fun. First of all, it had been an excitement for her to have a fella, and then she had begun to like him. She had tales of different countries. He had started as a deck boy at £1 a month on a ship of the Allen Line going out to Canada. He told her the names of the ships he had been on, and the names of the different services he had sailed through the Strait of Magellan, and I told her stories of the terrible Patagonias. He had fallen on his feet in Buenos Aires, he said, and had come over the old country for just an holiday. Of course, her father had found out the affair and had forbidden her to have anything to say to him. "I know these sailor chaps," he said. One day he had quarrelled with Frank, and after that she had to meet her lover secretly. The evening deepened in the avenue. The white of 2 letters in her lap grew indistinct. One was to Harry, the other was to her father. Ernest had been her favourite, but she liked Harry too. Her father was becoming old lately, she noticed. He would miss her. Sometimes he could be very nice. Not long before, when she had been laid up for a day, he had read her out a ghost story and made toast for her at the fire. Another day, when their mother was alive, they had all gone for a picnic to the Isle of Howth. She remembered her father putting on her mother's bonnet to make the children laugh. The time was running out, but she continued to sit by the window, leaning her head against the window curtain, inhaling the odour of dusty cretonne. Down far on the avenue she could hear a street organ playing. She knew the air. Strange that it should come that very night to remind her of the promise to her mother, a promise to keep the home together as long as she could. She remembered the last night of her mother's illness. She was again in the closed, dark room at the other side of the hall, and outside she heard a melancholy air of Italy. The organ player had been ordered to go away and given 6pence. She remembered her father strutting back into the sick room saying, "Damned Italians coming over here." As she moved, the pitiful version of her mother's life laid its spell on the very quick of her being. That life of commonplace sacrifice, closing in final craziness. She trembled as she heard again her mother's voice saying constantly with foolish insistence, Deravan Seram, Deravan Seram. She stood up in a sudden impulse of terror. Escape. She must escape. Frank would save her. He would give her love, perhaps love too. But she wanted to live. Why should she be unhappy? She had a right to happiness. Frank would take her in his arms, fold her in his arms, he would save her. She stood among the swaying crowd in the station at the north wall. He held her hand, and she knew that he was speaking to her, saying something about the passage over and over again. The station was full of soldiers with brown baggages. Through the wide doors of the sheds she caught a glimpse of the black mass of the boat lying beside that quay wall, with illuminated portholes. She answered nothing. She felt her cheek pale and cold, and out of a maze of distress she prayed to God to direct her, to show her what was her duty. The boat blew a long, mournful whistle into the mist. If she went tomorrow, she would be on the sea with Frank, steaming towards Buenos Aires. Their passage had been booked. Could she still draw back after all he had done for her? Her distress awoke a nausea in her body, and she kept moving her lips in silent, fervent prayer. A bell clanged upon her arm. She felt him seize her hand. Come. All the seas of the world tumbled about her arm. He was drawing her into them. He would drown her. She gripped with both hands at the arm railing. Come! No, 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 it was impossible. Her hand clutched the iron in a frenzy. Amid the seas she sent a cry of anguish. Evelyn! Evie! He rushed beyond the barrier and called her to follow. She was shouting at her to go on, but he still called to her. She set her white face to him, passive like an helpless animal. Her eyes gave him no sign of love or farewell or recognition. That's the end of Evelyn. He's a good. I haven't got them yet a bit. Called a man Bartleby the Scrivener a little. The way you can become trapped. Not in walls, but inside yourself. I think you do have a right to be happy, but it can be a very hard thing to do. Very hard thing to do indeed. Have a drink now. It's a surprisingly easy thing to do, to sacrifice yourself for others. To do the things you think you ought to do rather than the things you want to do. Even rather than the things you need to do. Yet at the same time, it's a terrible thing to be a purely selfless creature. You cannot stand alone in the world. I know that well. It's a terrible thing to be alone, care for none but yourself, to have none but yourself. And yet that wasn't the case here. See there, Harry. Could have been somewhere else, but chains of obligation, chains of memory, chains of dependence, even chains of habit. The unknown is a fearful thing. And sometimes it's right to be scared of it, as I myself learned after falling down there. But to be afraid of the unknown, the extent that it paralyses you, holds you back into a place you know is miserable, that's a terrible thought thing. It's said better the devil you know than the devil you don't. If you know a devil, and do not know what another place might hold, no, not that he even holds a devil. It seems mad to me to stay. I don't know. Maybe I don't fully understand it either. Rats don't have families the same way humans have families, don't form these attachments. Since I've had my head like this, since I've been able to think, I've never had anyone like that. I'd struggle to leave this library, this little corner of it that I've made for myself. And there are practical reasons too. The cheese, and I've no way of sustaining myself, even if I found one. I suspect I'd hang around here. I've got my little bed and my books. I've worked so hard for. Got about 30 of them now, Lord. And the shelves I built. I know this place. Know it better than anywhere. I think I should struggle to leave. At the same time, I know that there is nothing in the world I want more than to leave. I can only hope that if I find my chance, I don't let familiarity hold me back from it. Oh. Anyway, I'll have another drink. My throat is starting to wear a little. I'm not sure why, it's going a bit quicker tonight. Something about this book seems quite dry. Not in terms of the way it's written, I suppose. Not dry prose, but it dries me out. Might just be the heat, it's a little warm down here. No idea why it comes and goes and like that. No sun down here to warm things, but I suppose the sun must soak it up when it gets down here eventually. Anyhow, back to it. After the race, the cars came scudding in towards Dublin, running evenly like pellets in the groove of the Naas Road. They crested the hill, and in Shakur, sightseers had gathered in clumps to watch the cars careening homeward and through the channel of poverty and inaction. The continent sped its wealth and industry. Now and again the clumps of people raised the cheer of the gratefully oppressed. Their sympathy, however, was for the blue cars of their friends, the French. The French, moreover, were virtual victors. Their team had finished solidly. They had been placed second and third, and the driver of the winning German car was reported a Belgian. Each blue car therefore received a double round of welcome as it topped the crest of the hill, and each cheer of welcome were acknowledged with smiles and nods by those in the car. In one of those trimly built cars was a party of 4 young men whose spirits seemed to be at present well above the level of successful Gallicism. In fact, these 4 young men were almost hilarious. They were Charles Seguin, the owner of the car, Andre Riviera, a young electrician of Canadian birth, a huge Hungarian named Valona, and a neatly groomed young man named Doyle. Seguin was in his good humour because he had unexpectedly received some orders in advance. He was about to start a motor establishment in Paris, and Riviera were in good humour because he was to be appointed manager of the establishment. These 2 young men, who were cousins, were also in good humour because of the success of the French cars. Valona were in good humour because he had a very satisfactory luncheon, and besides he were an optimist by nature. The 4th member of the party, however, were too excited to be genuinely happy. He was about 26 years of age, with a soft light brown moustache and rather innocent-looking grey eyes. His father, who had begun life as an advanced nationalist, had modified his views early. He had made his money as a butcher in Kingston, and by opening shops in Dublin and in the suburbs he had made his money many times over. He had also been fortunate enough to secure some of the police contracts, and in the end he had become rich enough to be alluded to in the Dublin newspapers as a merchant prince. He had sent his son to England to be educated in a big Catholic college, and afterwards sent him to Dublin University to study law. Jimmy did not study very earnestly and took to bad courses for a while. He had money and he was popular, and he divided his time curiously between musical and motoring circles. Then he had been sent for a term to Cambridge to see a little life. His father, remonstrative, but covertly proud of the excess, had paid his bills and brought him home. It was at Cambridge that he had met Seguin. They were not much more than acquaintances, but Jimmy found great pleasure in the society of one who had seen so much of the world, and was reputed to own some of the biggest hotels in France. Such a person, as his father agreed, was well worth knowing, even if he had not been the charming companion he was. Valona was entertaining also, a brilliant pianist, but unfortunately very poor. The car ran on merrily with its cargo of hilarious youths. The 2 cousins sat on the front seat. Jimmy and his Hungarian friend sat behind. Decidedly, Valona was in excellent spirits. He kept up a deep bass hum of melody for miles of the road. The Frenchmen flung their laughter and light words over their shoulder, and often Jimmy had to strain forward to catch a quick phrase. This was not altogether pleasant for him, as he had nearly always to make a deft guess at the meaning and shout back a suitable answer in the teeth of an hour wind. The sight of Valona's humming would confuse anybody, the noise of the car too. Rapid motion through space elates one. So does notoriety, so does possession of money. These were 3 good reasons for Jimmy's excitement. He had been seen by many of his friends that day in the company of these continentals. The control Seguin had presented him to one of the French competitors, and, in answer to his confused murmur of compliment, the swarthy face of the driver had disclosed a line of shining white teeth. It was pleasant after that one to return to the profane world of spectators, amid nudges and significant looks. Then, as to money, he really had a great sum under his control. Seguin perhaps would not think it a great sum, but Jimmy, who, in spite of temporary errors, was at heart the inheritor of solid instincts, knew well with what difficulty it had been got together. This knowledge had previously kept his bills within the limits of reasonable recklessness, and if he had been so conscious of the labour latent in money when there had been questions of merely some freak of the higher intelligence, how much more so now when he was about to stake the greatest part of his substance. It was a serious thing for him. Of course, the investment were a good one. Seguin had managed to give the impression that it was by a favour of friendship, and the mite of Irish money was to be included in the capital of concern. Jimmy had a respect for his father's shrewdness in business matters, and in this case it had been his father who had first suggested the investment. Money had been made in the motor business, lots of money. Moreover, Seguin had the unmistakable air of wealth. Jimmy set out to translate in the day's work that lordly car on which he sat. How smoothly it ran, in what style they had come careening along the country roads. The journey laid a magical finger on the genuine pulse of life and gallantly the machine of human nerves strove to answer the bounding course of that swift blue animal. They drove down Dame Street. The street was busy with unusual traffic, now with the horns of motorists and the gongs of impatient tram drivers. Near the bank, Seguin grew up, and Jim and his friends alighted. A little knot of people collected on the footpath to pay homage to the snorting motor. The party was to dine together that evening in Seguin's hotel. Meanwhile, Jimmy and his friend, who was staying with him, were to go home to dress. The car steered out slowly for Grafton Street, while the two young men pushed their way through the knot of gazers. They walked northward with a curious feeling of disappointment in the exercise, for the city hung to pale globes of light above them in the haze of summer evening. In Jimmy's house, this dinner had been pronounced an occasion. A certain pride mingled with his parents' trepidation, a certain eagerness also to play fast and loose with the names of great foreign cities, of at least this virtue. Jimmy too looked very well when he was dressed, and as he stood in the hall giving the last equations to the bowls of his dress tie, his father may have felt even commercially satisfied at having secured for his son qualities often unpurchasable. His father, therefore, was unusually friendly with Bologna, and his manner expressed a real respect for foreign accomplishments. This subtlety of his host was probably lost upon the Hungarian, who was beginning to have a sharp desire for his dinner. The dinner were excellent, exquisite. Seguin, Jimmy decided, had a very refined taste. The party were increased by a young Englishman named Ruth, whom Jimmy had seen with Seguin at Cambridge. The young men supped in a snug room lit by electric candle lamps. They talked volubly and with a little reserve. Jimmy, whose imagination was kindling, conceived the lively youth of the Frenchman quite elegantly upon the firm framework of the Englishman's manner. A graceful image of his, he thought, and a just one. He admired the dexterity with which their host directed the conversation. The young men had various tastes, and their tongues had been loosened. Bologna, with immense respect, began to discover to the mildly surprised Englishman that because of the English madrigal, deploring the loss of the older instruments, Riviere, not wholly ingeniously, undertook to explain to Jimmy the triumph of the French mechanicians. The resonant voice of the Hungarian was about to prevail in ridicule of the spurious lutes of the romantic painter, and Seguin shepherded his party into politics. Here was congenial ground for all. Jimmy, under generous influence, felt the buried zeal of his father wake to life within him. He roused the torpid Ralph at last. The room grew doubly hot, and Seguin's task grew harder each moment. There was even danger of personal spite. The alert host, at an opportunity, lifted his glass to humanity, and, when the toast had been drunk, he threw open a window significantly. That night the city wore the mask of a capital. The 5 young men strolled along Stephen's Green in a faint cloud of aromatic smoke. They talked loudly and gaily, and their cloaks dangled from their shoulders. The people made way for them. At the corner of Grafton Street, the short fat man was putting 2 handsome ladies in a car, in charge of another fat man. The car drove off, and the short fat man caught sight of the party. "Andre, it's Farley." A torrent of talk followed. Farley was an American. No one knew very well what the talk were about. Bologna and Riviere were the noisiest, but all the men were excited. They got up on a car, squeezing themselves together amid much laughter. They drove by the crowd, blended now into soft colours, with music and merry bells. They took the train at Westland Row, and in a few seconds, as it seemed to Jimmy, they were walking out of Kingstown Station. The ticket collector saluted Jimmy. He was an old man. Fine night, sir? It was a serene summer night. The arbour lay like a darkened mirror at their feet. They proceeded towards it with linked arms, singing Cadet Roussel and a chorus, stamping their feet at every "Oh ho, oh ho, vraiment." No, that's right. Ho ho, ho, eh, vraiment. They got on a rowboat at the ship, at the slip, and made out for the Americans' yacht. There was to be supper, music, cards, Wilona said with conviction. It is beautiful. There was a yacht piano in the cabin. Wilona played a waltz for the Farley and Riviere. Farley acting as a cavalier and Riviere as a lady. There were an impromptu square dance, the men devising original figures. What merriment! Jimmy took his part with a will. This was seeing life, at least. Then Farley got out of breath and cried, "Stop!" The man brought in a light supper, and the young men sat down to it for form's sake. They drank, however. They were Bohemian. They drank Ireland, England, France, Hungary, the United States of America. Jimmy made a speech, a long speech, Wilona saying "Hear, hear" whenever there was a pause. There were a great clapping of hands when he sat down. It must have been a good speech. Farley clapped him on the back and laughed loudly. What jovial fellows! What good company they were! Cards, cards! The table was cleared. Wilona returned quietly to his piano and played voluntaries for them. The other men played game after game, flinging themselves. Flinging themselves boldly into the adventure. They drank the ale for the Queen of Hearts and the Queen of Diamonds. Jimmy felt obscurely the lack of an audience. The wit were flashing. They ran very high and paper began to pass. Jimmy did not know exactly who were winning, but he knew that he were losing. That were her own fault, for he frequently mistook his cards, and the other men had to calculate his IOUs for him. They were devils of fellows, but he wished they would stop. It was getting late. Someone gave the toast to the yacht, the Belle Newport, and then someone proposed one great game for a finish. The piano had stopped. Wilona must have gone up on deck. It was a terrible game. They stopped just before the end of it to drink for luck. Jimmy understood that the game lay between Ruth and Sigourney. What excitement! Jimmy were excited too. He would lose, of course. How much had he written away? The men rose to their feet to play the last trick, talking and gesticulating. Ruth won. The cabin shook with the young men's cheering and the cards were bundled together. They began then to gather in what they had won. Farley and Jimmy were the heaviest losers. He knew that he would regret in the morning, but at the present he was glad of the rest, glad of the dark stupor that would cover up his folly. He leaned his elbows on the table and rested his head between his hands, counting the beats of his temples. The cabin door opened and he saw the Hungarian standing in a shaft of grey light. Daybreak, gentlemen. And that's the end of After the Race. Another one, I'm puzzled after all of these. I'm going to take a drink again, I think. I'm not entirely sure what I think of that one. It seems very hopeful, very upbeat. Everyone seems like they're doing well and things will go grand for them. And yet at the same time it seems very sad, in a way I struggle to put my finger on. I think part of it is that the character we're seeing, whose eyes we're seeing through in this, the butcher's son, is clearly sort of the tag-along of the group. You'd think it would be the Hungarian who's poor, is like he can play the piano, but he doesn't worry about money, whereas the butcher's son is putting money in with the richer Frenchman, and losing money he can't afford to lose. He's dependent on this financially, whereas the Hungarian is just sort of floating along, living on his wits, which seem ample enough to support him. I don't know, it almost has the feel of a story of someone getting rolled. I thought perhaps that after all he was going to have lost more than he thought at cards, that his French friends were going to disappear, no sign of them ever having owned a hotel or a car company, but no, there's too much background to that. They know one another from other places and have acquaintances that they've known. It just feels very shallow, I suppose. Maybe that's judgmental of me. The eating, the drinking, the partying, and the losing the money. That's living the high life by all accounts. I don't know what puts me at edge. Maybe it's the narrator, I suppose. He's ill at ease, really. Overthinking things and worrying about things. Living the life of a libertine, but with the soul of a banker. Huh. That would put us at 5 stories. If we were all going to stop and do 3 days of this, that would be where I'd end. But something about these has got me in their thrall. I think I like James Joyce. I think I do, but I'm not sure if I should push on. I suppose I know I'm gonna. I'm trying to talk myself to it, but I'm going to because I want to. I wouldn't be trying to talk myself into it otherwise. I feel most keenly now that there's no one here to talk with me. I could really do with someone to talk these over with. I feel like I'm not getting every side of them. And there's sides to these stories that I am not even conceiving of. I wish there was someone here to talk to me about them. There's not, and there's nothing I can do about that but keep doing these. I hope someone comes along and cares for them enough to show up. So, suppose we'll push on. Suppose we will. 2 gallants. The grey warm evening in August descended upon the city, and a mild warm air, a memory of summer, circulated in the street. The street, shuttered for the repose of Sunday, swarmed with gaily coloured crowd. Like illuminated pearls, the lamps shone from the summits of their tall poles upon the living texture below, which, changing shape and hue unceasingly, sent up into the warm grey evening air an unchanging, unceasing murmur. 2 young men came down the hill of Rutland Square. One of them was just bringing a long monologue to a close. The other, who walked on the verge of the path and was at times obligated to step on the road owing to his companion's rudeness, wore an amused listening face. He was squat and ruddy. The yachting cap was shoved far back from his forehead, and the narrative to which he listened made constant waves of expression break forth over his face from the corners of his nose and eyes and mouth. Little jets of wheezing laughter followed one another out of his convulsed body. His eyes, twinkling with cunning enjoyment, glanced at every moment towards his companion's face. Once or twice he rearranged the light waterproof which he had slung over one shoulder in toreador fashion. His breeches, his white rubber shoes, and his jauntily slung waterproof expressed youth. His figure fell into rotundity at the waist, his hair was scant and grey, and his face, and the way his expression had passed it over, had a ravaged look. When we were quite sure that the narrative ended, he laughed noiselessly for fully half a minute. And he said, "Well, that tastes the biscuit." His voice seemed winnowed of vigour, and to enforce his words, he added with humour, "That takes the solitary, unique, and if I may so call it, recherché biscuit." He became serious and silent when he had said this. His tongue was tired, for he had been talking all the afternoon in a public house in Dorset Street. Most people considered Lennon a leech, but in spite of his reputation, his adroitness and eloquence had always prevented his friends from forming any general good policy against him. He had a brave manner of coming up to a party of them in a bar and of holding himself nimbly at the borders of the company until he was included in the round. He was a sporting vagrant, armed with a vast stock of stories, limericks, and riddles. He was insensitive to all kinds of discourtesy. No one knew how he achieved the stern task of living, but his name was vaguely associated with racing issues, or with racing tissues. "Where'd you pick her up, Corley?" he asked. Corley ran his tongue swiftly along his upper lip. "One night, man," he said, I was going along Dame Street, and I spotted a fine tart under Waterhouse's clock. I said good night, you know. She went for a walk round by the canal, and she told me she was a slightly in a house at Bagot Street. I put my arm round her and squeezed her a bit that night. And the next Sunday, man, I met her by appointment. We went out to Donnybrook, and I brought her into a field there. She told me she used to go with a dairyman. Fine, man. Cigarettes every night she'd bring me, and paying the tram out and back. And one night she brought me 2 bloody fine cigars. Oh, the real cheese, you know, that the old fellow used to smoke. I was afraid, man, she'd get in the family way. But she's up to the dodge. How do you think she'll marry her? Said Lennon. I told her I was out of a job, said Corley. I told her I was in Pimm's. She didn't know my name. I was too airy to tell her that. But she thinks I'm a bit of class, you know. Lennon laughed again noiselessly. "Of all the good ones ever I heard," he said, "that emphatically takes the biscuit." Corley's stride acknowledged the compliment. The swing of his burly body made his friend execute a few light skips from the path to the roadway and back again. Corley was the son of an inspector of police, He had inherited his father's frame and gait. He walked with his hands by his sides, holding himself erect and swaying his head from side to side. His head was large, globular and oily. It sweated in all weathers, and his large round hat, set upon it sideways, looked like a bulb which had grown out of another. He always stared straight before him, as if he were on parade, and when he wished to gaze after someone in the street, it was necessary for him to move his body from the hips. And presently we were about town, where if there were any job or break vacant, a friend were always ready to give him the hard work. He was often to be seen walking with policemen in plain clothes, talking earnestly. He knew the inner side of all affairs, and was fond of delivering final judgments. He spoke without listening to the speech of his companions. His conversation was mainly about himself, what he had said to such a person, what such a person had said to him, and what he had said to settle the matter. When he reported these dialogues, he aspirated the first letter of his name after the manner of Florentines. Lenan offered his friend a cigarette. As the two young men walked on through the crowd, Corley occasionally turned to smile at some of the passing girls. But Lenehan's gaze was fixed on the large faint moon circled with a double halo. He watched earnestly as the passing of the grey web of twilight across his face. At length he said, "Well, tell me, Corley, I suppose you'll be able to pull it off all right, eh?" Corley closed one eye expressively as an answer. "Is she game for that?" asked Lennon dubiously. "You never know women." "She's all right," said Corley. "I know the way to get around her, man. She's a bit gone on me." "You're what I call a gay Lothario," said Lennon. "And the proper kind of Lothario, too." A shade of mockery reviled the civility of his manner. To save himself, he had a habit of leaving his flattery open to interpretation of raillery, but Corley had not a subtle mind. "There's nothing to touch a good slavey," he affirmed. "Take my tip for it." "Well, one who's tried them all," said Lennon. "First I used to go with girls, you know," said Corley. I'm buzzing it. Girls off the South Circular. I used to take them out, man, on the train somewhere, or tram somewhere and pay the tram. I'd take them to a band or play at the theatre or buy them chocolate or sweets or something that way. I used to spend money on them right enough," he added, in a convincing tone as if he were conscientious of being disbelieved. But Lenan could well believe it. He nodded gravely. "I know that game," he said. "It's a mug's game." "Damn the thing I ever got out of it," said Corley. "Oh yeah," said Lenan. "Only off one of them," said Corley. He moistened his upper lip by running his tongue along it. The recollection brightened his eyes. He gazed at the pale disk of the moon, now nearly veiled, and seemed to meditate. "She was a bit of all right," he said regretfully. He was silent again, then added, "She's on the turf now. I saw her driving down Earl Street one night with two fellows with her in a car." "I suppose that's your doing," said Lenan. "There was others at her before me," said Corley philosophically. This time Lenan was inclined to disbelieve. He shook his head to and fro and smiled. "You know you can't kid me, Corley," he said. "Honest to God," said Corley. "Didn't she tell me herself?" Lenan made a tragic gesture. "Base betrayer," he said. As they passed along the railings of Trinity College, Lenan skipped out into the road, peered up at the clock. 20 after, he said. "Time enough," said Corley. "She'll be there all right. They always let her wait a bit." Lenan laughed quietly. "You're cod, Corley, you know how to take 'em," he said. "Might do all their little tricks," Corley confessed. "But tell me," said Lenan again, "you sure you can bring it off all right? You know it's a ticklish job. You're damn close on that point, eh? What?" His bright smile, small eyes searched his companion's face for reassurance. Corley swung his head to and fro as if to toss aside an insistent insect, and his brows gathered. "I'll pull it off," he said. "Leave it to me, can't you?" Lenan said no more. He did not wish to ruffle his friend's temper, and be sent to the devil and told that his advice were not wanted. A little tact was necessary. But Corley's brow was soon enough smooth again. His thoughts were running another way. "She's a fine, decent dart," he said, with appreciation. "That's what she is." They walked along Nassau Street, and then turned into Kildare Street. Not far from the porch of the club, an artist stood in the roadway, playing to a little ring of listeners. He plucked at the wires heedlessly, glancing quickly from time to time at the face of each newcomer, and from time to time unwarily also at the sky. His harp, too, heedless of her coverings, had fallen about her knees, seemed weary alike at the eyes of the strangers and of her master's hands. One hand played in the bass melody a silent unmoil, while the other hand careered the treble after each group of notes. The notes of the air throbbed deep and full. The two young men walked up the street without speaking, the mournful music following them. When they reached Stephen's Green, they crossed the road. Near the noise of the trams, the lights of the crowd released them from their silence. "There she is," said Corley. At the corner of Hume Street, a young woman was standing. She wore a blue dress and a white sailor hat. She stood on the curbstone, swinging a sunshade over one hand. An arm grew lively. "Let's have a squint at that, Corley," he said. Corley glanced sideways at his friend, and an unpleasant grin appeared on his face. "You trying to get inside me?" he asked. "Damn it," said Alarm boldly. "I don't want an introduction. All I want is to have a look at her. I'm not going to eat her." "Ah, look at her," said Corley more amiably. "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll go over and talk to her and you can pass by." "Right," said Lenard. Corley had already thrown one leg over the chains when Lenard called out, "And after? Where will we meet?" 10:30, answered Corley, bringing over his other leg. "Where?" "Corner of Merrion Street. We're coming back." "I got all right now," said Lenard, "and farewell." Corley did not answer. He saw it across the road, swaying his head from side to side. His bulk, his easy pace, and the solid sound of his boots had something of the conqueror in them. He approached the young woman and, without saluting, began at once to converse with her, which is why our son sailed more quickly and executed half turns on her heels. Once or twice when he spoke to her at close quarters, she laughed and bent her head. Nan observed him for a few minutes, then he walked rapidly along beside the chains to some distance and crossed the road obliquely. As he approached Hume Street corner, he found the air heavily scented, and his eye made a swift, anxious scrutiny of the young woman's appearance. She had her sundry finery on. A blue serge skirt held at the waist by a belt of black leather. The great silver buckle of her belt seemed to depress the centre of her body, catching the light stuff on her white blouse like a clip. She wore a short black jacket with a mother of pearl buttons and a ragged black bar. The ends of her twill collar hat had been carefully disordered, and a big bunch of red flowers was pinned in her bosom stems upwards. And Anne's eyes noted approvingly her stout, short, muscular body. Frank rude elf glowed on her face, on her fat red cheeks, and in her unabashed blue eyes. Her features were blunt. She had broad nostrils, a straggling mouth which lay open, and a contented leer, and two projecting front teeth. As he passed, Anne took off his cap, and after about 10 seconds, Corley returned a salute to the air. This he did by raising his hand vaguely and pensively, changing the angle of position of his hat. Anne walked as far as the Shelbourne Hotel, where he halted and waited. After waiting for a little time, he saw them coming towards him, and when they turned to the right, he followed them, stepping lightly in his white shoes down one side of Merrion Square. As he walked on slowly, timing his pace to theirs, he watched Corley's head, which turned at every moment towards the young woman's face, like a big ball revolving on a pivot. He kept the pair in view until he had seen them climbing the stairs of the Donnybrook tram. Then he turned about and went back the way he had come. Now that he were alone, his face looked bolder. His gaiety seemed to forsake him. He came by the railings of the Duke's lawn. He allowed his hand to run along them. The air which the harpist had played began to control his movements. His softly padded feet played the melody, while his fingers sought to scale the variations idly along the railings after each group of notes. He walked listlessly round Stephen's Green, and then down Grafton Street. Though his eyes took note of many elements of the crowd through which he passed, they did so morosely. He found trivial all that was meant to charm him, and did not answer the glances which invited him to be bold. He knew that he would have to speak a great deal to invent and to amuse, and his brain and throat were too dry for such a task. The problem of how he could pass the hours till he met Corley again troubled him a little. He could think of no way of passing them but to keep on walking. He turned to the left when he came to the corner of Rutland Square, and felt more at ease in the dark, quiet street, the sombre look of which suited his mood. He paused at last before the window of a poor-looking shop, over which the word "Refreshment Bar" were printed in white letters. On the glass of the window were two flying inscriptions: "Ginger Beer" and "Ginger Ale." A cut ham were exposed on a great blue dish, while near it, on a plate, lay a segment of very light plum pudding. He eyed this food earnestly for some time, and then, after glancing warily up and down the street, went into the shop quickly. He were hungry for, except for biscuits which he had asked two grudging curates to bring him, he had eaten nothing since breakfast time. He sat down at an uncovered wooden table opposite two work girls and a mechanic. A slatternly girl waited on him. "How much is a plate of peas?" he asked. "3 halfpence, sir," said the girl. "Bring me a plate of peas," he said, "and a bottle of ginger beer." He spoke roughly in order to belie his air of gentility. His entry had been followed by a pause of talk. His face was heated. To appear natural, he pushed his cap back on his head and planted his elbows on the table. The mechanic and the two work girls examined him point by point before resuming their conversation in a subdued voice. The girl brought him a plate of hot grocer's peas, seasoned with pepper and vinegar, a fork, and his ginger beer. He ate his food greedily and found it so good that he made note of the shop mentally. When he had eaten all the peas, he sipped his ginger beer and sat for some time thinking of Corley's adventure. In his imagination he beheld the pair of lovers walking along some dark road. He heard Corley's voice in deep, energetic gallantries, and saw again the leer of the young woman's mouth. The vision made him feel keenly his own poverty of purse and spirit. He was tired of knocking about, pulling the devil by the tail, shifts and intrigues. He would be 31 in November, but he'd never get a good job. But never have a home of his own. I thought how pleasant it would be, of a warm fire to sit by and a good dinner to sit down to. He walked the streets long enough with friends, with girls. He knew what those friends were worth. He knew the girls too. The experience had embittered his heart against the world. But all hope had not left him. He felt better after having eaten than he had felt before. Less weary of his life, less vanquished in spirit. He might yet be able to settle down in some snug corner and live happily if he could only come across some good, simple-minded girl, with a little of the ready. He paid 2 halfpenny to the slatternly girl and went out of the shop to begin his wandering again. Went into Capel Street and walked along towards the City Hall. Then he turned into Dame Street. At the corner of George Street he met 2 friends of his and stopped to converse with them. He was glad that he could rest from all his walking. His friends asked him had he seen Corley and what was the latest. He replied that he'd spent the day with Corley. His friends talked very little. They looked vacantly after some figures in the crowd and sometimes made a critical remark. One said that he had seen Mac an hour before in Westmoreland Street. Les Lennon said that he had been with Mac the night before in Egan's. The young man who had seen Mac in Westmoreland Street asked if it was true that Mac had won a bet over a billiard match. Lennon did not know. He said that Holohan had stood them drinks at Egan's. He left his friends at 10:15 and went up George's Street. He turned to the left at the City Markets and walked on into Grafton Street. The crowd of girls and young men had thinned, and on his way up the street he heard many groups and couples bidding one another good night. He went as far as the clock of the college, the surgeons, who were on the stroke of 10. He set off briskly along the northern side of the green, hurrying for fear Corley should return too soon. When he reached the corner of Merrion Street, he took his stand in the shadows of a lamp and blew out one of the cigarettes which he had reserved, and lit it. He leaned against the lamp-post and kept his gaze fixed on the parts from which he expected to see Corley and the young woman return. His mind became active again. He wondered if Corley managed it successfully. He wondered if he had asked her yet, or if he would leave it to the last. He suffered all the pangs and thrills of his friend's situation, as well as those of his own. The memory of Corley's slowly revolving head calmed him somewhat. He was sure Corley would pull it off all right. All at once the idea struck him that perhaps Corley had seen her own by another way, and given him the slip. His eyes searched the street. There were no sign of them. It was surely half an hour since he'd seen the clock of the College of Surgeons. Would Corley do a thing like that? He lit his last cigarette and began to smoke it nervously. He strained his eyes as each tram stopped at the far corner of the square. He must have gone home by another way. The paper of his cigarette broke and he flung it into the road with a curse. Suddenly he saw them come towards him. He started with delight and, keeping close to his lamp-post, tried to read the result in their walk. They were walking quickly, the young woman taking quick, short steps, while Corley kept beside her with his long stride. They did not seem to be speaking. Information of the result pricked him like the point of a very sharp instrument. He knew Corley would fail. He knew it was a no-go. They turned down Bagot Street and he followed them at once, taking the other footpath. When they stopped, he stopped too. They talked for a few moments, and then the young woman went down the steps in the area of a house. Corley remained standing at the edge of the path, a little distance from the front steps. Some minutes passed, and the hall door was opened slowly and cautiously. A woman came running down the front steps and coughed. Corley turned and went towards her. His broad figure hid hers from view for a few seconds, and then she reappeared, running up the steps. The door closed on her, and Corley began to walk swiftly towards Stephen's Green. The man hurried on in the same direction. Some drops of light rain fell down, and he took them as a warning, glancing back towards the house which the young woman had entered to see that he was not observed. He ran eagerly across the road. Anxiety and his swift run made him pant. He called out, "Hello, Corley!" Corley turned his head to see who had called him, and then continued walking as before. The man ran after him, settling the waterproof on his shoulders with one hand. "Hello, Corley!" he cried again. He came level with his friend and looked keenly in his face. He could see nothing there. "Well," he said, "did it come off?" They had reached the corner of Ellie's place. Still without answering, Corley swerved to the left and went up the side street. His features were composed and stern calm. The man kept up with his friend, breathing uneasily. He was baffled, and a note of malice pierced through his voice. "Can't you tell us?" he said. "Did you try her?" Corley elbowed at the first lamp and stared grimly before him. Then, with a grave gesture, he extended his hand towards the light and smiled and opened it slowly to the gaze of his disciple. A small gold coin shone in the palm. That's the end of that one. Or should I say of 2 gallons? I think there's something I'm missing there at the ending. Some sort of cultural reference that I'm not comprehending. I don't know the significance of the gold coin. It's an odd story. At first I didn't much care for Corley and Lannan. And in fact I'm not sure even at the end that I care for them much. I do find Lannan a sympathetic character. The way he's nothing to do with his time, just wandering. Stopping the week but worrying about the money. I'm sure if he'll ever find a place in the world. Strange. Strange indeed. I really do not understand the nature of these stories. They do always seem to have such depth and such complexity that a lot of it seems to elude me. I have to come back to them. But I'm going to kill you. I'm going to find where you live and I'm going to do unspeakable things to you. You will never sleep again. Let devils bedevil you all nights. Let your eyes fall from your sockets in gouts of flame and ash. You run undying and unyielding. Oh, I despise you. Come here. Come to my house where I seek. I spend all my time reading, hoping that someone will come along. And you come into my eyes. You disturb me and you speak. Speak to me of wicked things. Bedevil you. Bedamn you. A curse upon your house. A pox upon you. May you know no peace nor the love of a woman. May no man see you as friend. May every door be closed to you. I curse you in the old ways and the new. May your nights be restless, and your days agonizing. La shadok shavarin geyan, chai chanin and shtethra. These aren't my words, are they? Not my words at all. I'm just a rat, and I'm here to read. Got my little book and I don't understand it, and I wish I had someone to talk to about it, but I don't. I'll have a little drink of my water, which is terribly lukewarm today. And I'll get back to it. I'll do at least one more because I'll have done 7 and I can do 8 tomorrow and have it done. And maybe I'll do 2 more and then I'll have done 8 today and have only 7 tomorrow. Or maybe I'll even do 4 more and have only 5 to do tomorrow. And make it seem like an easy load. But I am made weary. It's sad, because I like these. These are interesting. I can see why these are good. It's not like the Aesop thing where I'm frustrated because I didn't get much out of them. There's lots to have from these. What's frustrating is that I don't understand them. And that I can see what I would need to understand them better is to talk to someone about them, someone who'd also read them, someone who could give another opinion. But there's no one here, and then every time I settle down and I look up and then there's a little notice, someone is here, and all it is these devils coming to sell me things. Want popularity, buy viewers. Offering another terrible addiction. Here, come and have the appearance of prosperity. Come have the symbol you'd need to move with our crowds. To spend money you don't have, to be the saddest character in a little troupe. No. Maybe I do understand a bit. Maybe they brought me something after all. Damn their eyes, damn their eyes. It is terribly lonely down there. Terribly lonely indeed. I really am trying. I'm show 'em up every day at the same time. I'm going as hard as I can. I'm trying to read enough. I'm trying to do it well. No one comes, or if they do come, they just stop in and leave. I don't think anyone watches these after I'm done. I'm just here. Just me. Me and the lamp who makes me do this for no reason. The benefit of none. And what wretched creature am I? What wretched creature am I? Just a rat. Just a rat. I think we're having trouble with the wards again. You can hear it in the stutters. Seems to do it especially when I'm reading. My dreams are disturbed. There are things down here, things that aren't me. Not physical things, though, not things with bodies, only things down here with bodies are the beasts. There's ghosts, not like you spirits who are supposed to be here watching. Spirits that haunt me, that master me by times. I talk often about gaining intelligence, but I still feel so small and so stupid all the time. I read these books and I try and understand. Perhaps it's important to learn. I don't even know how he chooses them. And it's worse because I can glimpse what he's talking about, I can glimpse the importance in these stories, the significance of the rituals taught by the priest, the strangeness of the man talking to the boys, the fear of being trapped in a life you don't want. The sad, failed fantasy of the bizarre, the strutting cocksureness of false confidence in young men, and the hollow, gallant levity of a man with nothing to his name. I can see that these are important, I just don't understand why. And the worst part is, I feel I should understand why. For every part of me that remembers being a rat before I fell down here, there's another part of me that wants to remember, doesn't remember, but wants to remember something else. I don't think this mind that I've got come from nowhere. All these thoughts, all these knowings. There was something before them. There's a shape that is missing, something. Has memories that should be there but aren't. And so the only memories I have are the memories of the rat. And so the rat I am. I only dream sometimes of being something more. Dreams can be a terrible thing. Right, at least one more I said, didn't I? Even though I'm sure that things are going wrong, I can feel it. One more, said I. So one more it'll be at least. And maybe, who knows, by the time I'm done with it I'll feel strong enough for another. And maybe I won't. Maybe at night I'll go away and I'll never come back. Who can say? The future's never known. That's not sure I'll be back tomorrow. As I've said I will be. Every day I'll be. At least as long as I can. I can tomorrow. The boarding house. Miss Mooney were a butcher's daughter. She was a woman who was quite able to keep things to herself. A determined woman. She had married her father's foreman and opened a butcher shop near Spring Gardens. But as soon as his father-in-law were dead, Mr. Mooney began to go to the devil. He drank, plundered the till, ran headlong into debt. It was no use making him take the pledge. He was sure to break out again a few days after. By fighting his wife in the presence of customers and by buying bad meat, he ruined his business. One night he went for his wife with a cleaver, and she had to sleep in her neighbour's house. After that they lived apart. She went to the priest and got a separation from him with care of the children. She would give him neither money nor food nor house room, and so he were obliged to enlist himself as a sheriff's man. He were a shabby, stooped little drunkard with a white face and a white moustache and white eyebrows, penciled above his little eyes, which were pink-veined and raw. Night all day long he sat in the bailiff's room when we put on a job. Miss Mooney had taken what remained of her money out of the butcher's business and set up a boarding house in Hardwick Street. For a big, imposing woman, her house had a floating population made up of tourists from Liverpool and the Isle of Man, and occasionally artistes from the music hall. This resident population were made up of clerks from the city. She governed her house cunningly and firmly. You went to give credit, and to be stern, and when to let things pass. All the resident young men spoke of her as the madam. Miss Mooney's young men paid 15 shillings a week, board and lodging, beerest out at dinner excluded. They shared in common tastes and occupations, and for this reason they were very chummy with one another. They discussed with one another the chances of favourites and outsiders. Jack Mooney, the madam's son, who was clerk to a commission agent in Fleet Street, had the reputation of being an hard case. He was fond of using soldiers' obscenities. Usually he came home in the small hours. When he met his friends, he had always a good one to tell them, and he was always sure to be on to a good thing, as to say, a likely horse or a likely artiste. They were also handy with the mitts and sang comic songs. On Sunday nights there would often be a reunion in Miss Mooney's front drawing room. The musical artistes would oblige, and Sheridan played waltzes and polkas, and vamped accompaniments. Polly Mooney, the man's daughter, would also sing. She sang, "I'm a naughty girl, you needn't sham, you know I am." Polly was a slim girl of 19. She had soft hair and a small, full mouth. Her eyes, which were grey with a shade of green through them, had an habit of glancing upward when she spoke with anyone, which made her look like a little perverse Madonna. Miss Mooney had first sent her daughter to be a typist in a corn factor's office, but as a disreputable sheriff's man used to come every other day to the office asking to be allowed to say a word to his daughter, she had taken her daughter home again and set her to do housework. As Polly were very lively, the intention were to give her the run of the young men. Besides, young men like to feel that they hear is a young woman not very far away. Polly, of course, flirted with the young men, but Miss Mooney, who was a shrewd judge, knew that the young men were only passing their time away. None of them meant business. Things went on so for a long time, and Miss Mooney began to think of sending Polly back to the typewriter, when she noticed that something was going on between Polly and one of the young men. She watched the pair and kept her own counsel. Polly knew that she was being watched, but still her mother's persistent silence could not be misunderstood. There had been no open complicity between mother and daughter, no open understanding, but, though people in the house began to talk of the affair, still Miss Mooney did not intervene. Polly began to grow a little strange in her manner, and the young man were evidently perturbed. At last, when she judged it to be the right moment, Miss Mooney intervened. She dealt with moral problems as a cleaver deals with meat, and in this case she made up her mind. It was a bright Sunday morning of early summer, promising heat, but with a fresh breeze blowing. All the windows of the boarding house were open, and the lace curtains ballooned gently towards the street beneath the raised sashes. The belfry of George's church set out constant peals of worshippers, singly or in groups, traversed the little circus before the church, revealing their purpose by their self-contained demeanour no less than by the little volumes in their gloved hands. Breakfast were over in the boarding house, and the table of the breakfast room were covered with plates on which lay yellow streaks of eggs, and morsels of bacon fat and bacon rind. Miss Mooney sat in the straw armchair and watched the servant, Mary, remove the breakfast things. She made Mary collect the crusts and pieces of broken bread to help make Tuesday's bread pudding. When the table cleared, the broken bread collected, the sugar and butter safe under lock and key, she began to reconstruct the interview which she had had the night before with Polly. Things were as she had suspected. She had been frank in her question, and Polly had been frank in her answers. Both had been somewhat awkward, of course. She had been made awkward by her not wishing to receive the news in too cavalier a fashion, or seemed to have connived. Polly had been made awkward not merely because allusion to that kind always made her awkward, but also because she did not wish it to be thought that, in her wise innocence, she had divined the intention behind her mother's tolerance. Miss Mooney glanced instinctively at the little gilt clock on the mantelpiece as soon as she had become aware, through her revelry, that the bells of George's church had stopped ringing. It was 17 minutes past 11. She would have lots of time to have the matter out with Mr. Doran, and then catch short 12s at Marlborough Street. She was sure she would win. To begin with, she had all the weight of social opinion on her side. She were an outraged mother. She had allowed him to live beneath her roof, assuming he were a man of honour, and he had simply abused her hospitality. He was 34 or 35 years of age, so that youth could not be pleaded as his excuse, nor could ignorance be his excuse, since he was a man who had seen something of the world. He had simply taken advantage of Polly's youth and inexperience. That was evident. The question was, what reparation would he make? There must be reparation made in such cases. It is all very well for the man. He can go away as if nothing has happened, having had his moment of pleasure, but the girl has to bear the brunt. Some mother would be content, others would be content to patch up such an affair for a sum of money. She had known cases of it, but she would not do so. For her, only one reparation could make up for the loss of her daughter's honour: marriage. She counted all her cards again before sending Mary up to Miss Doran's room to say that she wished to speak with him. She felt sure she would win. He were a serious young man, not rakish or loud voiced like the others. If it had been Mr. Sheridan or Mr. Meade or Bantam Lyons, her task would have been much harder. She did not think he would face publicity. All the lodgers in the house knew something of the affair. Details had been invented by some. Society had been employed for 13 years in the great Catholic wine merchant's office, and publicity would mean for him perhaps the loss of his sit. Whereas if he agreed, all might be well. She knew he had a good screw for one thing, and she suspected he had a bit of stuff put by. Nearly the half hour, she stood up and surveyed herself in the pier glass. The decisive expression of her great florid face satisfied her, and she thought of some mothers she knew who could not get their daughters off their hands. Mr. Doran was very anxious indeed this Sunday morning. He had made 2 attempts to shave, but his hand had been so unsteady that he had been obliged to desist. 3 days' reddish beard fringed his jaw. Every 2 or 3 minutes a mist gathered on his glasses, so that he had to take them off and polish them with his pocket handkerchief. The recollection of his confession of the night before were a cause of acute pain to him. The priest had drawn out every ridiculous detail of the affair, and in the end had so magnified his sin that you were almost thankful at being afforded a loophole of reparation. The harm was done. What could he do now but marry her or run away? He could not brazen it out. The affair would be sure to be talked of, and his employer would be certain to hear of it. Dublin is such a small city. Everyone knows everyone else's business. He felt his heart leap warmly in his throat as he heard in his excited imagination old Mr. Leonard calling out in his rasping voice, "Send Mr. Doran in her place." All his young years of service gone for nothing, all his industry and diligence thrown away. As a young man he had sown his wild oats, of course. He had boasted of his free thinking and denied the existence of God to his companions in public houses. That was all past and done with, nearly. He still bought a copy of Reinald's newspaper every week. He attended to his religious duties, and for 9/10 of the year he lived a regular life. He had money enough to settle down on it, but not that the family looked down on her. First of all, they were a disreputable father, and then her mother's boarding house was beginning to catch a certain fame. He had a notion that he was being had. He could imagine his friends talking of the affair and laughing. She was a little vulgar. Sometimes she said, "I seen," and "if I had have known." What would grammar matter if he really loved her? He could not make up his mind whether to like her or despise her for what she had done. Of course, he had done it too. His instinct urged him to remain free, not to marry. Once you were married, you were done for, it said. While he was sitting helplessly on the side of his bed in shirt and trousers, she tapped lightly at his door and entered. She told him all, that she had made a clean breast of it to her mother, and that her mother would speak with him that morning. She cried and threw her arms around his neck, saying, "Oh, Bob, what am I to do? What am I to do at all?" She would put an end to herself, she said. He comforted her feebly, telling her not to cry, it would be all right, never fear. He felt getting his shirt, the agitation of her bosom. It was not altogether his fault that it had happened. He remembered well, with the curious patient memory of the celibate, the first casual caress her dress, her breath, her fingers had given him. Then late one night, as he was undressing for bed, she had tapped at his door timidly. She wanted to relight a candle at his, for hers had been blown out by a gust. It was her bath night. She wore a loose open combing jacket of printed flannel. The white instep shone in the opening of her furry slippers. The blood glowed warmly behind her perfumed skin. From her hands and wrist too, as she lit and steadied a candle, a faint perfume arose. On nights when he came in very late, it was she who warmed up his dinner. He scarcely knew what he was eating, feeling her beside him alone at night in the sleeping house. And her thoughtfulness. If the night was anywhere cold or wet or windy, there was sure to be a little tumbler of punch ready for him. Perhaps they could be happy together. They used to go upstairs together on tiptoe, each with a candle, and on the third landing exchange reluctant good nights. They used to kiss. He remembered well her eyes, the touch of her hand, and his delirium. The delirium passes. He echoed her phrase, applying it to himself. What am I to do? The instinct of the celibate warned him to hold back, but the sin were there. Even his sense of honour told him that reparation must be made for such a sin. While he was sitting with her on the side of the bed, Mary came to the door and said the missus wanted to see him in the parlour. He stood up to put on his coat and waistcoat, more helpless than ever. When dressed, he went over to her to comfort her. It will be all right, never fear. He left her crying on the bed and moaning softly, oh my God. Going down the stairs, his glasses became so dimmed with moisture that he had to take them off and polish them. He longed to ascend through the roof and fly away to another country where he would never hear of his trouble. And yet a force pushed him downstairs step by step. The implacable face of his employer and the madam stared up upon his discomfiture. On the last flight of stairs he passed Jack Mooney, coming up from the pantry, nursing 2 bottles of Bass. They saluted coldly, and the lover's eyes rested for a second or two on a thick bulldog face and a pair of thick short arms. When he reached the foot of the staircase, he glanced up and saw Jack regarding him from the door of the return room. Suddenly remembered the night when one of the musical artistes, a little blonde Londoner, had made a rather free allusion to Polly. The reunion had been almost broken up on account of Jack's violence. Everyone tried to quiet him. The musical artiste, a little paler than usual, kept smiling, saying there was no harm meant. Jack kept shouting at him as if the fellow tried that sort of game on his sister, he'd bloody well put his teeth down his throat, so he would. Polly sat for a little time on the side of the bed, crying, and she dried her eyes and went over to the looking glass. She dipped the end of the towel in the water jug and refreshed her eyes with cool water. She looked at herself in profile and readjusted the hairpin above her ear. Then she went back to the bed again and sat at the foot. She regarded the pillows for a long time, and the sight of them awakened in her mind the secret amiable memories. She rested the nape of her neck against the cool arm bent rail and fell in a reverie. There were no longer any perturbations visible on her face. She waited on patiently, almost cheerfully, without alarm, her memories gradually given place to hopes and visions of the future. Her hopes and visions were so intricate that she no longer saw the white pillows on which her gaze was fixed, or remembered that she was waiting for anything. At last she heard her mother calling. She started to her feet and ran to the banister. Polly, Polly. Yes, Mamma. Come down, dear. Mr. Doran wants to speak to you. Then she remembered what she had been waiting for. That's the end of the board now. I just want to take a pause here for a moment and say there are illustrations in this book. I don't think I ever went to show them to you, which is a shame. Most of them are pretty standard, but the one in this one is of the fella sitting in his shirt sleeves on his bed. His suspenders sort of sat around his waist on the ground, just looking out the window. From side profile, it's a very striking one. There's a cross on the wall and a little, I think it's a catechism, framed above his bed head. Humans are very strange about love, and the institution of marriage in its entirety is a very strange thing. Maybe it's not fair to say strange about love, actually. Love is in itself strange, but humans are strange about sex. All of them, in my experience. The whole entrapment of marriage, the fear of it, giving in to your wants, leading to a whole lifetime of choice taken away. And yet the fear of that choice too. He doesn't seem totally opposed to this, but at the same time, he is being trapped. You can see it in the motions they make, the mother's thoughts, Polly's actions, her tears drying, being wiped away, a sorrow forgotten the moment he's gone, visions dance in their head. The man is trapped, and a trapped animal will always panic, always fight, even if it can't get away. It's strange, because I don't feel especially sympathetic to him over to the, mistress of the boarding house and Polly. Though they seem to have cunningly trapped him, they've all lived hard lives, haven't they? In fact, they, two of them, seem to have lived harder lives than he has. He seems to have done alright by himself. Doesn't seem a lot of hardship in him other than the fear of what he might lose. Having that to lose. By saying that, I suppose maybe there's something to be had in the fact that he's living in a boarding house. I don't know the sort of financial realities of it. I don't have an understanding of the money itself, let alone the economics of the time period, but I suppose a man living in a boarding house in a single room above someone else's domain is probably doing worse than someone who has their own home. Then maybe it's just an efficiency thing for him, unmarried as he is, unwed. Maybe it'll be good for him. Maybe it will work out and they'll be happy. Or maybe it won't. We don't know. We don't even know if they're actually getting married when the story ends. That's another thing with these. They all end at points where there's seemingly something left of the tale to come. Leave it ambiguous what will happen. Will they be happy? Will the young man make his fortune in motor cars? Will Loran find his place in the world? All these questions remain to us unanswered. A strange thing, that, isn't it? A strange thing indeed. But still, I think I've done enough dwelling on these. I think I have another one in me, so. A little cloud. 8 years before he had seen his friend off at the North Wall and wished him Godspeed, Gallagher had gotten on. You could tell that once by his travelled air and his well-cut tweed suit and fearless accent. Few fellows had talents like his, and fewer still could remain unspoiled by such success. Gallagher's heart were in the right place, and he had deserved to win. It was something to have a friend like that. Little Chandler's thoughts, ever since lunchtime, had been of his meeting with Gallagher, and Blair's invitation in the great city of London where Gallagher lived. He recalled Little Chandler because, though he was but slightly under the average stature, he gave one the idea of being a little man. His hands were white and small, his frame was fragile, his voice was quiet, and his manners were refined. He took the greatest care of his fair silken hair and moustache, and used perfume discreetly on his handkerchief. The half-moons of his nails were perfect, and when he smiled you caught a glimpse of a row of childish white teeth. As he sat at his desk in the King's Inns, he thought what changes those 8 years had brought. The friend whom he had known under a shabby and necessitous guise had become a brilliant figure on the London press. He turned often from his tiresome writing to gaze out of the office window. The glow of a late autumn or sunset covered the grass plots and walks. It cast a shower of kindly golden dust on the untidy nurses and decrepit old men drowsed on the benches. It flickered upon all the moving figures, on the children who ran screaming along the gravel paths, on everyone who passed through the gardens. He watched the scene and thought of life, and, as always happened when he thought of life, he became sad. A gentle melancholy took possession of him. He felt how useless it was to struggle against fortune, as being the burden of wisdom which the ages had bequeathed to him. He remembered the books of poetry upon his shelves at home. He had bought them in his bachelor days, and many an evening, as he sat in his little room off the yawl, he had been tempted to take one down from the bookshelf and read out something to his wife. The shyness had always held him back, and so the books had remained on their shelves. At times he repeated lines to himself, and this consoled him. When his hour had struck, he stood up and took leave of his desk and of his fellow clerks punctiliously. He emerged from under the feudal arch of the King's Inns, a neat, modest figure, and walked swiftly down Henrietta Street. The gold sunset was waning, and the air had grown sharp, and all the grimy children populated the street. They stood around on the roadway or crawled up the steps before the gaping doors, or squatted like mice upon the threshold. Little Chandler gave them no thought. He picked his way deftly through all that minute vermin-like life, and under the shadow of the gaunt spectral mansions in which the old nobility of Dublin had roisted. No memory of the past touched him, but his mind was full of present joy. He had never been in Corliss's, but he knew the value of the name. He knew that people went in there after the theatre to eat oysters and drink liqueurs. He had heard that the waiters there spoke French and German. Walking swiftly by at night, he had seen cabs drawn up before the door and richly dressed ladies escorted by cavaliers alight and enter quickly. They wore noisy dresses and many wraps. Their faces were powdered and they caught up their dresses when they touched earth, like alarmed Atlantas. He always passed without turning his head to look. It was his habit to walk swiftly in the city, in the street, even by day. When he found himself in the city late at night, he hurried on his way apprehensively and excitedly. Sometimes, however, he courted the causes of his fears. He chose the darkest and narrowest streets, and, as he walked boldly forward, the silence that was spread about his footsteps troubled him. The wandering silent figures troubled him, and at times the sound of low fugitive laughter made him tremble like a leaf. He turned to the right towards Capel Street. Ignatius Galler on the London Press. Who would have thought it possible 8 years before? Still, now that he reviewed the past, little Chandler could remember many signs of future greatness in his friend. People used to say that Ignatius Galler were wild. Of course, he did mix with a rakish set of fellows at the time, drank freely, borrowed money on all sides. In the end, he had gotten mixed up in some shady affair, some money transactions. At least that was one version of his flight. But nobody denied him talent. There was always a certain something in Ignatius Galler that impressed you in spite of yourself. Even when he were out at elbows and his wits' end for money, he kept up a bold face. Little Chandler remembered, and the remembrance brought out a slight flush of pride to his cheek, one of Ignatius Galler's sayings when he was in a tight corner. "Half down now, boys," he used to say like hardly. "Where's my considering cap?" That was Ignatius Galler all out, and damn it, you couldn't but admire him for it. Little Chandler quickened his pace. For the first time in his life, he felt himself superior to the people he passed. For the first time, his soul revolted against the dull inelegance of Capel Street. There was no doubt about it. If you wanted to succeed, you had to go away. You could do nothing in Dublin. As he crossed Grattan Bridge, he looked down the river towards the lower quays, and pitied the poor stunted houses. They seemed to him a band of tramps huddled together along the river banks, their old coats covered with dust and soot, stupefied by the panorama of sunset, and waiting for the first chill of night to bid them arise, shake themselves and be gone. He wondered whether he could write a poem to express his idea. Perhaps Galler might be able to get it into some London paper for him. Could he write something original? He was not sure what idea he wished to express, but the thoughts of that poetic moment that touched him took life within him like an infant hope. He stepped onward bravely. Every step brought him nearer to London, farther from his own sober and artistic life. A light began to tremble on the horizon of his mind. He was not so old, 32. His temperament might be said to be just at the point of maturity. There were so many different moods and impressions that he wished to express in verse. He felt them within him. He tried to weigh his soul, see if it was a poet's soul. Melancholy was the dominant note of his temperament. He thought, it was a melancholy tempered by recurrences of faith and resignation and simple joy. If he could give expression to it in a book, poems, perhaps the men would listen. He would never be popular, he saw that. He could not sway the crowd, but he might appeal to a little circle of kindred minds. The English critics perhaps would recognise him as one of the Celtic school by reason of the melancholy tone of his poems. Beside that, he would put in allusions. He began to invent a sentence and phrases from the notices which his book began. Mr. Chandler has the gift of essay and graceful verse. A wistful sadness pervades these poems. A Celtic note. It would appear his name were not Irish looking. Perhaps it would be better to insert his mother's name before the surname. Thomas Malone Chandler, or better still, T. Malone Chandler. We'd speak to Galler about it. We pursued his reverently so ardently that we passed the street and had to turn back. As he came near Corliss, his former agitation began to overmaster him, and he halted before the door in indecision. Finally he opened the door and entered. The light and noise of the bar held him at the doorway for a few moments. He looked about him, but his sight was confused by the shine of many red and green wine glasses. The bar seemed to him to be full of people, and he felt that the people were observing him curiously. He glanced quickly to the right and left, frowning slightly to make his errands appear serious. When his sight cleared a little, he saw that nobody had done to look at him, and there, sure enough, was Ignatius Galler, leaning with his back against the counter and his feet planted far apart. "Hello, Tommy, old hero, here you are. What is it to be? What will you have? I'm taking whiskey. Better stuff than we get across the water. Soda, lithia? No mineral? I'm the same, spoils the flavour. Here, garçon, bring us 2 halves of malt whiskey like a good fellow. Well, now have you been pulling along since I saw you last? Dear God, how old we're getting. You see any signs of aging in me? What? A little grey and thin on the top? What?" Ignatius Galler took off his hat and displayed a large, closely cropped head. His face was heavy, pale and clean-shaven. His eyes, which were a bluish slate colour, relieved his unhealthy pallor, and shone out plainly above the vivid orange tie he wore. Between these rival features, the lips appeared very long, shapeless, and colourless. He bent his head and felt with the two sympathetic fingers the thin air in his crown. Little Chandler shook his head in denial. Ignatius Gallop put on his hat again. "It pulls you down," he said. "Press life. Always hurry and scurry, looking for copy and sometimes not finding it. And then always to have something new in your stuff. Damn proofs and printers, I say. For a few days I'm deuced glad. I can't dare to get back to the old country. Doesn't feel good, a bit of a holiday. I've got a ton better one up since I landed here again in dear dirty Dublin. Here you are, Tommy. Water? Say one." Little Chandler allowed his whisky to be very much diluted. "You don't know what's good for you, my boy," said Ignatius Galler. "I drink mine neat." "I drink very little as a rule," said little Chandler modestly. "I'll half one or so when I meet any of the old crowd, that's all." "Ah, well," said Ignatius Galler cheerfully. "Here's to us in old times and old acquaintances." They clinked glasses and drank the toast. "I met some of the old gang today," said Ignatius Galler. "The horror seems to be in a bad way. What's he doing?" "Nothing," said little Chandler. "He's gone with the dogs." "Hogan has a good sit, hasn't he?" "Yes, he's in the Land Commission. I met him one night in London. He seemed to be very flush. Poor O'Hara. Booze, I suppose." "Oh, things do," said little Chandler shortly. Ignatius Galler laughed. "Tommy," I said, "I see you haven't changed an atom. You're the very same serious person that used to lecture me on Sunday mornings when I had a sore head and fur on my tongue. You want to knock about a bit in the world. Have you never been anywhere even for a trip?" "I went to the Isle of Man," said little Chandler. Ignatius Galler laughed. "The Isle of Man," he said. "Go to London or Paris. Paris for choice. That'd do you good. Have you seen Paris?" "I should think I have. Looked about there a little." "Is it really so beautiful as they say?" asked little Chandler. He sipped a little of his drink while Ignatius Galler finished his boldly. "Beautiful," said Ignatius Galler, pausing on the word and on the flavour of his drink. "It's not so beautiful, you know." "Of course it is beautiful. It's the life of Paris, that's the thing. There's no city like Paris for gaiety, movement, excitement." Little Chandler finished his whisky and after some trouble succeeded in catching the barman's eye. He ordered the same again. "I've been to the Moulin Rouge," Ignatius Galler continued while the barman had removed their glasses, "and I've been to all the Bohemian cafes. Hot stuff. Not for a past chap like you, Tommy." Little Chandler said nothing until the barman returned with the two glasses. He touched his friend's glass lightly and reciprocated the former toast. He was beginning to feel somewhat disillusioned. Galler's accent and way of expressing himself did not please him. There was something vulgar in his friend, and which he had not observed before. Perhaps it were only the result of living in London amid that bustle and competition of the press. The old personal charm was still there, under his new gaudy manner, and after all Galler had lived, he had seen the world, little Chandler looked at his friend enviously. "Everything in Paris is gay," said Ignatius Galler. "They believe in enjoying life. Don't you think they're right? If you want to enjoy yourself properly, you must go to Paris. And mind you, they've a great feeling for the Irish there. When they heard I was from Ireland, they were ready to eat me, man." Little Chandler took 4 or 5 sips from his glass. "Tell me," he said, "is it true that Paris is so immoral, as they say?" Ignatius Galler made a Catholic gesture with his right arm. "Every place is immoral," he said. "Of course you do find spicy bits in Paris. Go to one of the student halls, for instance. That's lively, if you like, when the coquettes begin to let themselves loose. You know what they are, I suppose?" "I've heard of them," said little Chandler. Ignatius Galler drank off his whisky and shook his head. "Ah," he said, "you may say what you like. There's no woman like the Parisienne, for style, for go." "And it is an immoral city," said little Chandler, with timid insistence, "when compared with London or Dublin." "London," said Ignatius Galler. "It's 6 to 1 half a dozen the other. You ask Hogan, my boy. I showed him a bit about London when he was over there. You'd open your eyes. I say, Tommy, don't make a bunch of that whiskey. Lick her up." "Nah, really. Oh, come on. Another won't do you any harm. What is it, the same again, I suppose?" "All right. Francois, the same again. Will you smoke, Tommy?" Ignatius Galler produced his cigarette case. My two friends lit their cigarettes and puffed them in silence till their drinks were served. "I'll tell you my opinion," said Ignatius Galler, emerging after some time from the cloud of smoke in which he had taken refuge. "It's a rum world. Talk of immorality. I've heard of cases, what must I say, and I've known them, cases of immorality." Ignatius Galler puffed thoughtfully at his cigar, and then, in a calm historian's tone, he proceeded to sketch for his friend some pictures of corruption which was rife abroad. He summarised the vices of many capitals, and seemed inclined toward the Palm and Berlin. Some things he could not vouch for, his friend had told him, but others he had personal experience. He spared neither rank nor caste. He revealed many of the secrets of religious houses on the continent, and described some of the practices which were fashionable in our society, and ended by telling with details a story about an English duchess, a story which he knew to be true. And Chandler were astonished. "Ah, well," said Ignatius Galler, "here we are in old jog along Dublin, where nothing is known of such things." "Although you must find it," said little Chandler, "after all the other places you've seen." "Well," said Ignatius Galler, "it's a relaxation to come over here, you know. And after all, it's the old country, as they say, isn't it? You can't help having a certain feeling for it. That's human nature. But tell me something about yourself, Ogun. Tell me something about yourself. Ogun told me you had tasted the joys of connubial bliss. 2 years ago, wasn't it?" And Chandler blushed and smiled. "Yes," he said, "I was married last May, 12 months. "I hope it's not too late in the day to offer you my best wishes," said Ignatius Galler. "I didn't know your address, or I'd have done so at the time." He extended his hand, which little Chandler took. "Well, Tommy," he said, "I wish you and yours every joy in life, old chap. Tons of money, and may you never die till I shoot you. And that's the wish of a sincere friend, an old friend. You know that?" "I know that," said little Chandler. "Any youngsters?" said Ignatius Galler. Little Chandler blushed again. "We have one child," he said. "Son or daughter?" "A little boy." Ignatius Galler slapped his friend sonorously on the back. "Bravo," he said. "I wouldn't doubt you, Tommy." Little Chandler smiled, looking confusedly at his glass, and bit his lower lip, with 3 childless woolly white front teeth. "I hope you'll spend an evening with us," he said, "before you go back. My wife will be delighted to meet you. We can have a little music." "Thanks awfully, old chap," said Ignatius Galler. "Sorry we didn't meet earlier, but I must leave tomorrow night." "Tonight, perhaps?" "I'm awfully sorry, old man, because I'm over here with another fellow. Clever young chap he is too. We arranged to go to a little card party. Only for that. No, in that case. Who knows?" said Ignatius Galler considerately. "Next year I might take a little skip over here now that I've broken the ice. It's only a pleasure deferred." "Very well," said little Chandler. "The next time you come we must have an evening together. That's agreed now, isn't it?" "Yeah, that's agreed," said Ignatius Galler. "Next year if I come, parole d'honneur." "I clinched the bargain," said little Chandler. "We'll just have one more now." Ignatius Galler took out a large gold watch and looked at it. "Is it to be the last?" he said. "Because you know I have an AP." "Oh yes, positively," said little Chandler. "Very well then," said Ignatius Galler. "Let's have another one. As Duc Andurius. That's a good vernacular for a small whisky, I believe." Little Chandler ordered the drinks. The blush, which had risen to his face a few moments before, was establishing itself. A trifle made him blush at any time, and now he felt warm and excited. 3 small whiskies had gone to his head, and Gallar's stronger cigar had confused his mind, for he was a delicate and abstinent person. The adventure of meeting Galler after 8 years, of finding himself with Galler and Corliss surrounded by lights and noise, of listening to Gallar's stories and sharing for a brief space Gallar's vagrant and triumphant life, upset the equipoise of his sensitive nature. He felt acutely the contrast between his own life and his friend's. It seemed to him unjust. Galler was his inferior in birth and education. He was sure that he could do something better than his friend had ever done, could ever do, something higher than mere tawdry journalism, if only he got the chance. What was it that stood in his way? His unfortunate timidity? He wished to vindicate himself in some way, to assert his manhood. He saw behind Gallar's refusal of his invitation. Galler only patronising him by his friendliness, just as he would patronise an island by his visit. The barman brought their drinks. Little Chandler pushed one glass towards his friend and took up the other boldly. "Who knows," he said as they lifted their glasses. "When you come next year I may have the pleasure of wishing long life and happiness to Mr. and Mrs. Ignatius Galler." Ignatius Galler, in the act of drinking, closed one eye expressively over the rim of his glass. When he had drunk, he smacked his lips decisively, set down his glass and said, "No blooming fear of that, my boy. I've got to have my fling first, see a bit of life and the world before I put my head in the sack, if I ever do." "Some day you will," said little Chandler calmly. Ignatius Galler turned his orange tie and sleek blue eyes full upon his friend. "You think so?" he said. "You put your head in the sack," repeated Chandler stoutly. "Like everyone else, if you can find the girl." He had slightly emphasised his tone, and he were aware that he had betrayed himself. But though the colour had heightened in his cheek, he did not flinch from his friend's gaze. Ignatius Galler watched him a few moments, and then said, "If it ever occurs to you, you may bet your bottom dollar there'll be no mooning and spooning about it. I mean to marry money. She'll have a good fat account at the bank, or she won't do for me." Little Chandler shook his head. "My man alive," said Ignatius Galler vehemently, "you do know what it is. If I only say the word, and tomorrow I can have the woman and the cash. You don't believe it? Well, I know it. There are hundreds, one must say, thousands of rich Germans and Jews rotten with money that would only be too glad. You wait a while, my boy, see if I don't play my cards properly. When I go about a thing, I mean business, I tell you. You just wait." He tossed his glass to his mouth, finished his drink, and laughed loudly. Then he looked thoughtfully before him and said in calmer tones, "I'm in no hurry. I can wait. I don't fancy tying myself up to one woman, you know." He imitated with his mouth the act of tasting and made a wry face. Must get a bit stale, I should think, he said. Little Chandler sat in the room off the hall, holding the child in his arms. To save money, they kept no servant, but Annie's young sister Monica came in for an hour or so in the morning and an hour or so in the evening to help. Monica had gone home long ago. They were a quarter to 9. Little Chandler had come home late for tea, and moreover, he had forgotten to bring Annie home the parcel of coffee from Booley's. Of course, she was in a bad humour and gave him short answers. She said she would do without the tea, without any tea, but when it came the time at which the shop at the corner closed, she decided to go out herself for a quarter pound of tea and 2 pounds of sugar. She put the sleeping child deftly in his arms and said, "Here, don't wake him." A little lamp, with a white china shade, stood upon the shade stood up on the table. Its light fell over a photograph, which was enclosed in a frame of crumpled horn. It was Annie's photograph. Little Chandler looked at it, pausing at the thin, tight lips. She wore the pale blue summer blouse which he had brought her home as a present one Saturday. It cost him 10 and 11 pence. But what an agony of nervousness it had cost him. I had suffered that way, waiting at the shop door until the shop were empty, standing at the counter and trying to appear at his ease while the girl piled ladies' blouses before him, paying at the desk and forgetting to take up the odd penny of his change, being called back by the cashier, and finally striving to hide his blushes as he left the shop by examining the parcel to see if it was securely tied. When he brought the blouse home, Annie kissed him and said it was very pretty and stylish. When she heard the price, she threw the blouse on the table and said it was a regular swindle to charge 10 and 11 pence for that. At first she wanted to take it back. When she tried it on, she was delighted with it, especially with the make of the sleeves. He kissed him and said he was very good to think of her. I looked coldly in the eyes of the photograph, and they answered coldly. Certainly they were pretty, and the face itself was pretty. We found something mean in it. Why was it so unconscious and ladylike? The composure of the eyes irritated him. They repelled him and defied him. There were no passion in them, no rapture. He thought of what Gala had said about a rich Jewess. Those dark oriental eyes, he thought, how full they are of passion, of voluptuous longing. Why had he married the eyes in the photograph? He caught himself up at the question, and glanced nervously round the room. He found something mean in the pretty furniture which he had bought for his house from the hire system. Annie had chosen it herself, and it reminded him of her. They were too prim and pretty. A dull resentment against his life awoke within him. Could he not escape from his little house? Was it too late for him to try and live bravely like Gala? Could he go to London? There were the furniture still to be paid for. If he could only write a book and get it published, they might open the way for him. A volume of Byron's poems lay before him on the table. He opened it cautiously with the left hand, lest he should waken the child. He began to read the first poem in the book. Hushed to the winds and still the evening gloom, not e'en a zephyr wanders through the grove, whilst I return to view my Margaret's tomb, scatter flowers on the dust I love. He paused. He felt the rhythm of the verse about him in the room. How melancholy it was. Could he too write like that? Express the melancholy of his soul in verse? There were so many things he wanted to describe. The sensation of a few hours before on Grattan Bridge, for example. If he could get back again in that mood. The child awoke and began to cry. He turned from the page and tried to hush it, but it would not be hushed. He began to rock it to and fro in his arms, but its wailing cry grew keener. He rocked it faster, while his eyes began to read the second stanza. Within this narrow cell reclines a clay well once. It was useless. He couldn't read, he couldn't do anything. The wail of the child pierced the drum of his ear. It was useless, he were a prisoner for life. His arms trembled with anger, and suddenly bent to the child's face. He shouted, "Stop!" The child stopped for an instant, and a spasm of fright began to scream. He jumped up from his chair and walked hastily up and down the room with the child in his arms. It began to sob piteously, losing its breath for 4 or 5 seconds, and then bursting out anew. The thin walls of the room echoed the sound. He tried to soothe it, but it sobbed more convulsively. He looked at the contracted and quivering face of the child and began to be alarmed. He counted 7 sobs without a break between them, and caught the child to his breast in fright. If it died. The door was burst open and the young woman ran in panic. What is it? What is it?" she cried. The child, hearing its mother's voice, broke out into a paroxysm of sobbing. "It's nothing, Annie, it's nothing," he began to cry. She flung her parcels on the floor and snatched the child from him. "What have you done to him?" she cried, glaring into his face. Little Chandler sustained for one moment a gaze of her eyes, and his heart closed together as he met the hatred in them. He began to stammer. It's nothing. He began to cry. I didn't do anything." "What?" Give no heed to him, she began to walk up and down the room, clasping the child tightly in her arms and murmuring, my little Manny, was you frightened, love? There now, love, there now. Lamb and bow, Mama's little lamb of the world, there now. Little Chandler felt his cheeks suffused with shame. They stood back out the lamplight. And listened while the paroxysm of the child's sobbing grew less and less, and tears of remorse started to his eyes. And that's the end of a little cloud. That puts us at 8 of these completed, but looking at the length of the book, I don't know that I'm even halfway through it. Indeed I'm not. In fact, if I look at the page markings, the next 5 stories that come after this will be almost as long as the 8 I've read already. And then the last one is half as long again, or is half as long as any one of them sections. Lord, to actually get through about half this book, I'd have to push probably 2 or 3 more stories on. I don't think I have that in me at night, so what I think I'll do is I'll plan to do the 5 tomorrow, and then the day after I'll just do the 1, have a bit of a short one. That'll be the plan, but some reflection on that, and a little drink of water first too, because my throat's dry. Well, that's an odd one. I almost feel like I should call to mind my sort of railing against how people become trapped in their own minds, but I don't think he is trapped. He sees himself as trapped in his life, trapped unhappily. But that's only because this friend of his, this Galar, has come along and shown him this sort of false face, claiming to be this worldly man, this city-living person, claiming to see more, see higher, but, well, I've been to Paris. Before I was down here, I've been a few places in Europe, and I've been to Paris. And I tell you, Paris is a shithole. Stinks. The people there are no happier than anyone else. They live the same, fight the same, eat the same. There's this area it has, a mystery, but it's no better. Just about anyone who's been there will tell you, at least anyone who's been there any length. And the mystique it has is just that, a mystique. Once you know the thing, it goes away. I expect the same is true of all of James Galar's life and success. Maybe he has some notoriety in the press, and maybe he has some money. Maybe he even could marry rich if he wanted to, but it doesn't make him a happy man. And yet by casting himself as happy, by casting himself as some sage wise in the ways of the world, he makes this man who seemed otherwise pretty content with his lot, miserably unhappy. Makes him snap at his child, fight with his wife, doubt himself, dream of things that he maybe could do. I think it was fair to say that he has the soul of a poet in him somewhere, a love of verse that he has set aside, and maybe it's even fair to say that part of that is due to the realities of his life with his wife. But he would gain no happiness from turning aside and pursuing a life like James Galar did. No. He needs only to embrace who he is, and yet he sees no person he is that he would want to be. That's his way forward. So he sees another man who he thinks is great, and this man portrays himself as great, and all it does is make him miserable, for he cannot be that man. It is necessary in life to be yourself. That's so terribly difficult. I almost want to press on. I can feel a catch in my throat, and I do not feel purely well. So I think I shall call it there for tonight. We shall return to this tomorrow and plan to finish it tomorrow and the day after, and maybe just finish it tomorrow if we're feeling strong enough. These are interesting stories, and Lamp has agreed that each one needs its own story, so I'm getting plenty of cheese for the reading of it. Which is good, because I burnt through some of my stockpile reading the Time Machine. But I'm not happy reading it, which is a shame. It's a good story. It's a good book. But I can feel in it an acute absence. my misunderstanding, my lack of understanding, the paucity of what I can get from it. I know there is more to be had out of this, and that I could be getting more from it, and I know what I need to get more from it, which is conversation. But the only person here I can talk to is Lamb, and he will not converse with me. But the whole point of this exercise he puts me on is to speak with you, and the only ones who come in here are the wicked men selling me their lies. These James Gallards, them symbols. If you see this, if you're someone who's seen this after the fact, if you watch it, come and see one of these live. Come and talk to me. There's more to be had for in this, for myself, but for you as well. There's a depth to these, a richness that has to be lived to be experienced. Just a book isn't the whole thing. It's the people, always the people in these stories. And through speaking with people can we understand them. As I sit reading them alone in a book, even read them aloud to a hopeful audience. Without discussion, without reciprocity, there is nothing. They ring Allah, and I ring Allah. I'm tired now. I thank you for coming, anyone who came, not that anyone did, and I thank you for watching this if you are watching this in the future. I wish you all the well that I have not wished those who come to me in anger and ignorance, selling things. And, what am I saying? Goodbye.